Okay, it looks like most everyone has been let in. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission meeting. I am Christina Crea, WASDOT Communications, and others joining the presentation today include Warren Hendrickson, the CACC chair, Lindsay Burgess from PRR, and 4 Kimley Horn representatives who will introduce themselves later in the presentation. Commission members, please keep your microphone on mute unless you are speaking during the meeting. And if you have a comment or question during the presentation, please just speak up and unmute yourself. Before we roll into public comments, Warren will do roll call and go through the agenda.
Well, thank you, Christina. And I would like to echo Christina's welcome this morning to all members of the attending public and to our panelists, as well as our voting and non-voting members of the commission. This is our first meeting of 2023 and the first since our last meeting in late September. So we have had a huge volume of changes to the makeup of the commission in the last several months. And in particular, I want to take a moment just to go ahead and acknowledge our past contributors to the commission and also welcome our new members. From the voting members, David Fleckenstein, the chair of the commission, retired from public service and WASDOT Aviation as its director on December 1st. As a result of his retirement, I, as the vice chair, have stepped in as the acting chair of the commission since then. Jeffrey Brown has also left the commission, as has Tom Embleton, and Arif Gauss left his position on the commission as a voting member representing Plainfield Snohomish County Airport. On the non-voting side, Senator Jim Honeyford has retired from public service as a legislator, and Rob Hodgman, WASDOT Aviation, has left the agency as a non-voting member and is now the airport director at Yakima Air Terminal, McAllister Field. All of these individuals have contributed greatly to the work of the commission, and we are deeply thankful for their support. In particular, as I believe most of the public and the commission members are well aware, Rob Hodgman has been the one individual that has truly kept the wheels on the bus, and we are deeply thankful for his contributions. I want to wish a very specific welcome now to our 2 new voting members, Eric Johnson and Wendy Janway, replacing Tom Embleton, and Eric Johnson replacing David Fleckenstein. Wendy is en route and will be joining the meeting shortly. On awaiting appointment from the governor, Arif Gauss has only been on a short sabbatical as he has now moved into the Port of Seattle and will be resuming Jeffrey Brown's position as soon as the gubernatorial appointment takes place. And then replacing Arif, also awaiting appointment up at Payne Field, is Joshua Marcy. So that is the change on the voting member side. On the non-voting member side, with Senator Honeyford's retirement, we certainly welcome Senator Curtis King to the commission as the non-voting Senate legislative representative, one of 4 legislative representatives. So in that case, let's begin a roll call, and I will call out the names. If you would, as I call your name, or if you want to just be ready for me calling your name, I will be calling them out in order of voting members first, then non-voting members, and in alphabetical order. So if you would like to unmute yourself just to expedite the process, that would be great. First is Lauren Carr.
Sorry, believe it or not, it took too long to unmute, even if with the request. I am here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. Steve Edmiston.
Here.
Mark Iglesian.
Here.
Arif Gauss. I do believe I saw you checked in.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrea Goodpasture will be delayed. Wendy Janway also is delayed. Eric Johnson.
Present.
Shane Jones.
Present.
Larry Crowder.
Present.
Stroud Kunkel.
Present.
Jim Kuntz.
Present.
Joshua Marcy. Didn't necessarily expect that he would attend, given the appointment hasn't taken place, so not an issue. Robin Todd.
I see some people are trying to log in on the Teams invite, so I'm working that side. Joshua Marcy was just trying to log on there. So I'm trying to on the login information for the Zoom meeting.
I'm here now, Eric. Thank you.
Okay, you bet.
Great, great. Okay, Robin Toth
I'm here, Warren. Thank you.
and Bryce Yada. Bryce? Okay. We have 9 appointed voting members present. On the non-voting side, Tony Dean,
Present.
Lois Ballenbeck, I do not expect with the legislative hearings in place that we will see the legislators today, but just in case, Representative Tom Dent. Senator Karen Kaiser. Senator Curtis King. Representative Tina Orwell. Robert Rodriguez. Rudy Rudolph.
Present.
Jason Thibodeau. And Carrie Waller.
Present.
We have 4 non-voting members. So of the 23 active commission members right now, we have 13 present at the present time. Later, before we get into any action items that might come before the commission, we will re-verify the quorum of voting members for those items that do require a quorum. One of the things I would like to address is just wish to remind everybody in terms of when a quorum is required. And specifically, according to our charter, which was adopted in January of 2022 by the commission, the quorum only applies to those votes, quote, identifying a preferred location for a new primary commercial aviation facility. So these would be the recommendations of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, all other action before the commission in accordance with our past practice as a body is based on a simple majority vote of all commission members, both voting and non-voting. But only those specific final recommendations, 2 that we've already accomplished and 1 that remains before us by June 15th of this year, require the quorum and the 9 affirmative votes. So with that, that roll call is complete and we will move on to the agenda review. We will commence a 20-minute public comment period. And then our public outreach company, PRR, will discuss our recent open house and provide the public engagement updates. I want to take a moment to specifically praise Lindsay Burgess and her entire PRR team. We just completed the open house last week on October 22nd, and already the report has been finalized and distributed to the entire commission. That's incredible, given the volume of work that was done. So well done by Lindsay and her team at PRR. We will then briefly, and this will be my part, I'll recap my recent coordination and communication with the local governments, tribal nations, and also community-based organizations since October, provide a legislative update of House Bill 1791. We will then move into action items. The one of selection of a new commission chair. Since I have been just performing as the acting chair, this is our first public meeting since that transition took place. So we will confirm the new chair and then potential commission next steps as a potential action item, depending upon the will of the voting members going forward. We'll take a break and then we will then go into the aviation system plan update. And we'll spend the last hour talking about greenfield site screening, airspace analysis, air cargo forecasts. And then at the completion of that presentation, commission members may be able to direct questions to the aviation system plan team for whatever needs to take place. As we approach the commission discussion on next steps, we will take a look and see where we are with regard to a quorum. We will be open to the fact that in a perfect world, just to be completely transparent, the commission discussion on next steps and a potential action item would be the last item of business to be conducted. But we became well aware over a month ago that we were going to be limited in terms of having a full quorum of 12 in and that quorum would only exist until 2 p.m. at the latest. And as a result, the agenda was driven by the fact that a quorum would be needed for any potential action item. And if in fact we can verify that a quorum can exist until 3 p.m., then we will take the liberty of reversing the agenda on those items and do the aviation system plan first, and then consider our next steps. So that will be determined in the next hour as we get to that particular point in the agenda. And then we'll conclude our work today with an adjournment at 3 p.m. Going forward, there's two things I would like to mention, and I will review again a little bit later on. When we use the term greenfield sites or a greenfield airport, we are not talking about an area that is undeveloped. We are talking about a location that is simply not home to an existing airport. Every greenfield site that the commission has reviewed, as I believe everyone is well aware, is a home to a business, to a rural community, to neighbors, to residents, to our local Puget Sound population. So we want to be very clear that we recognize that there are impacts, but the term greenfield site is simply restrictive to not being home to an existing airport. And that's the approach in which the CAC has approached that terminology. Perhaps, quite honestly, maybe not the best term, but it's the one that we've chosen and used as a convention. Secondly, I do also want to acknowledge that the work of the CAC and the work of the Washington State Aviation System Plan Update are two different entities. WSDOT Aviation has engaged Kimberly Horn as the consultant to perform the Aviation System Plan Update. That is a blank sheet of paper for the state agency, and we are fortunate that the timing of this current update has been done and scoped in a way that has provided tremendous and significant information and data to the CAC. The CAC, as you will often hear me refer to it as the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission, so when you hear the term CAC, that's what we're referring to, has some restrictions on it. It cannot consider recommendations within a county of a population exceeding 2 million. That means recommendations cannot include King County. Also, the CAC cannot site on or near a military installation that would negatively impact that installation's military mission. The aviation system plan is under no such restrictions. So when we see the data that comes from the Kimberly Horn team, recognize that they are operating from fewer rules and restrictions than the CAC. The CAC indeed is aware of that and has taken that into account. So just caveats right off the bat. And with regard to that, I will now pass it back on over to you, Christina, for the public comment period. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. We will now start the public comment period for this meeting. Please press the hand raise tool in Zoom if you would like to speak. I will state your name and you will have 2 minutes for public comment. If at the end of 2 minutes you go over, I will state your 2 minutes are over and ask that you please wrap up your comment. Please abide by the protocols of the commission meeting to help this meeting run smoothly. Now we will start with James Helmo.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is James Helm. I reside in the Great Putty Plan area of Pierce County. I've addressed you previously and submitted information with regard to the 2 green fields in Pierce County. I want to talk about this at the very beginning is with regard to distance. It's about 38 miles between Payne Field near Everett and Sea-Tac International Airport, and 36 miles between Joint Base Lewis McChord and Sea-Tac. You really need about 4 miles separation from Payne Field to the north and at least 40 miles south of the boundary with Joint Base Lewis McChord, particularly given the military statement that the current 3 locations under consideration are inconsistent with its military mission. To the south is Lewis County, a heavily forested area. Your legislation still considers looking at greenfields. That's a fatal flaw. Greenfields are largely associated with floodplains, shallow water, low-level aquifers, less so with forested areas. Forested areas can be easily cleared with a new access road to Interstate 5 and close to the railroad lines with construction of a spur line for trains to deliver aviation fields. The 2 proposed sites in Pierce County are on top of the Central Pierce sole source aquifer. I spoke with staffs of the Department of Ecology and also with the EPA back in Washington, D.C. The latter created the aquifer in 1995. Both staffs are concerned about what's going on, but they couldn't comment without a permit request. Also, the Pierce East site conflicts with another essential public facility, the Federal Bonneville Power Administration high power lines. 2 9,000 feet runways would have to go under the major interstate power line. The administration staff told me they would not move that major power line. I know you have a lot of limitations because you really didn't get the chance to look at King County. You were really restricted to green fields. You didn't really consider infrastructure and a lot of environmental issues. So good luck with your voting. Thank you very much for giving me the time to speak.
Thank you, James. Up next, we have Stu Souders.
Hello, this is Stu Souders, resident of Thurston County in Lacey, and I just want to express my opposition to the Greenfield site in Thurston County. As one might imagine, I am concerned about the proximity, the change to our environment, the change to my property values, and I struggle with the reality that Yakima would be interested in having a facility on the eastern side of the state. And I would just ask the commission, continue this outreach, consider the impacts that it's having to residents such as myself, and recognize that everything is about trade-offs, and there are probably better options out there. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Stu. Up next, we have Tim O'Brien.
Yes, I'd just like to make a brief comment. I represent Enumclaw Plateau Community Association, and I know that Southeast King and the Enumclaw Plateau has been in consideration throughout the process, even though a final decision, at least by the CACC, is not allowed to consider that particular spot. I just want to mention that that site, the criteria that was used by the consultant and by WSDOT to consider that appears to be flawed by the people who live here and know it much better than the consultants from just a little bit further away. In particular, it looks, as a crow flies, it looks like it may be close to population and corridors, but when you actually realize just how far it is from the I-5 corridor and some of the geographical barriers that make it difficult to get to, the cost and the difficulties to build ground transport would be extremely difficult to really use that site in Southeast King, the Enumclaw Plateau, as a viable site for the airport. One, the site is not large enough physically. When you look at unless you want to fill in these very large gorges that are a mile across, the White River Gorge and the Green River Gorge and Valley, you don't end up with enough space really for more than one runway. And that really doesn't solve a whole lot of problems in terms of capacity. The other is to bridge those big canyons, those big gorges with bridges would be, at least $1 billion a piece, and you're probably talking 4, 5, 6 bridges that would be needed. And that's just bridges, not the other infrastructure that's needed. And then when it all comes down to it, to try to actually get there, right now it takes, in normal traffic, it takes an hour and a half to get from Tukwila or Seattle to the Enumclaw Plateau. And that's the 90 minutes cutoff, and that's already there. And certainly it could be even more difficult in the future. There's also terrain impacts that really haven't been fully considered, like the mountains and the large hills that are on that particular site. And Mount Rainier is much closer than to that site, and the Cascades, of course, than Sea-Tac was. And when you fly out of Sea-Tac, you really have to gain altitude to clear around Mount Rainier. On dark nights, that could be a very big safety issue. The other is airspace constraints, as it's already part of the Sea-Tac airspace design. it just really doesn't seem logical. I agree with some of the other respondents that it seems better to consider a wider array of sites like Yakima, who's already saying that they would accept that proposal. That's the end of my statement.
Thank you, Tim. Up next, we have Jake Poole. Are you able to unmute your computer, Jake? Okay, we will go back to
Hello.
Jake. Oh,
Hello.
oh, there we go.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry, I was having an issue. Yeah, so my public comment is my name is Jake Poole. I'm covering the Pierce County side. I live in the central Pierce County location. I'm one of the organizers of the coalition against the Graham, Eatonville, Roy airports. There's a whole laundry list, obviously, of issues with the 3 last locations that have been selected, the 2 in Pierce County and the 1 in Thurston. And it's been very clearly demonstrated that none of the sites are viable to move forward. So I would highly encourage the voting members and the non-voting members to consider as an action item to remove those sites and not to proceed forward. The legislators have heard us, and the majority have, put out legislation to end this work and to proceed in a better manner with better parameters. And I would hope that you guys would see this and decide to remove the sites now and release the public from the trauma that's been created and the environmental concern, and allow us to move forward in a better, productive manner with the new work group under 1791 legislation that's sitting in the Senate right now. Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Jake. Up next, we have Susan Cummings.
Hello, my name is Susan Cummings. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm a resident of Thurston County. My home and my farm is within the circle of the Greenfield site that's proposed for Thurston. I'm also the author of a petition on change.org opposing the Thurston site, which as of this morning has received 9,618 signatures. I don't know if any of you have seen the petition so far. I did send it to the CACC earlier on when it was originally posted in the fall. Has anyone here seen that petition?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we are aware of it.
Yes, okay. So I just want to reiterate everything that's in the petition because I haven't spoken in any of the other meetings that have taken place, the concerns about environmental justice within the Nisqually tribe, with environmental threat to endangered species, Mazama pocket gopher, and others. The fact that this proposed site directly overlaps the McAllister Springs geological sensitive area, and the well fields there supply drinking water to most of Olympia and the Nisqually Reservation. I also want to say that we question the CACC's growth predictions for the aviation industry, and why is it a given that the aviation industry must grow unchecked in this region, given our concerns about climate destruction? Also, I don't understand why high-speed rail isn't part of the discussion if we are looking to address growth in the region and addressing transportation needs for the future. I think I said it all, and I know that other people want to speak as well, so I'll not take all of my 2 minutes and turn it over back to you. But thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Susan. Up next, we have Jeff Cohen.
Hi there, Jeff Cohen here from East Olympia in Thurston County. The CAC insists on following the law to select a site while at the same time selectively ignoring the restriction against interfering with military operations. The Thurston site, for example, overlaps significantly with the JBLM training area. The CAC paid over $150,000 to consultants who specialize in community engagement, public affairs, and social marketing, yet every one of the cities in and around the 3 sites were omitted from the CAC's public outreach while you were claiming the goal was to reach us. We only learned about this plan from a random letter to the editor from one concerned resident. Only 6 of over 5,590 neighbors we connected with in a Facebook group that we started on October 5th were aware of your plan, despite it being in progress for over 3 years. While the pandemic might have had some impact on the CAC's work, we were all online even more and would have engaged if you had included us. Considering the unanimous opposition to these 3 sites from residents, all local leaders, the tribes, JBLM, etc., I request that you put an end to the stress you have caused us and remove the 3 greenfield sites from consideration immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And I don't see any other hands raised. I'll give it just a second. Oh, I do see one more. Kim.
Hello. Hello, my name's Kim Anton, and I am a member of the Enumclaw Plateau Community Association, and our airport opposition group is named Save the Plateau. And I hadn't realized that at this meeting, we haven't really reached out to the CAC because the Enumclaw site was what we were considered and told was off the table. So for the CAC, actually. But it's our understanding that the Washington Aviation System Plan did do analysis of the King County site as a 4th site and did not really disclose this publicly. When exploring the potential locations in King County, the WASP reviewed Enumclaw and found it to be unsuitable. We're concerned that the new work group would allow Enumclaw Plateau to be pursued as a host for a new airport, despite the fact that both the WASP and the CAC saw the site as unsuitable for a new airport. There are several reasons why Enumclaw Plateau was rightfully excluded from consideration by the CAC, and these reasons should not be ignored nor reconsidered. King County Council has stated the Enumclaw Plateau is inappropriate for an airport given its ecological importance, the significant investments that have been made to improve salmon habitat, remove fish barriers, protect wetlands, watersheds, and preserve farmland. If the legislature wants to reopen an airport study work group, we request that all excluding all King County sites from consideration. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Kim. Up next, we have Derek Peterson.
All right, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes.
Okay, good. I appreciate your time. I've been a participant before. I just wanted to reemphasize, and I agree with the person who says that the Native Americans have an agreement that's been violated. The airspace overlaps with JBLM. That's a violation. The commission is volunteer, and they've done an outstanding job. I appreciate them trying to tackle this impossible task, but they have had their hands tied since they started. And I just found out about this last year. They've been doing it for 3 years. I realized they're going to restart, but Yakima does want this. None of the greenfield sites in this commission's purview are viable. And if they want to get with Yakima, they're going to have the city, the county, the state, and federal government resources for infrastructure, which is not addressed in any of the sites in Thurston or Pierce County. and they need to get started on that. It'll take a couple hours to get over there, but if they build an infrastructure plan to get over there from Seattle, from Tacoma, from Olympia, people will go out there, and they need to consider that. And I would appreciate them putting out to the public what their plans are. And Mr. Hendrickson, I appreciate your time. I realized that last time I spoke to you, you said that you're not a voting member. Are you going to be a voting member before the recommendation goes to the legislature? Is what I want to know. And the last comment is that the public comments should probably come after you guys have had your say and given an update on where you stand. That's about all I've got to say for right now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Derek. And up next we have Joe.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Joe Zeichkin. I live in the Graham area where the site 2 is. I think it'd be right in the middle of the runway. But I hear everybody speaking against this, and I'm against it as well. But I think that we need to look at the big picture and see that something like this is probably going to happen. And what I don't want to see is another 3 years of uncertainty going on. If it's going to end up here anyway, why don't we, make our recommendation and then move forward? It looks like you guys have done a lot of work, and I understand all the comments against it, but another 3 years of uncertainty isn't going to help us out either. So either let us know that it's going to be here, or let us know it's not going to be here. But that's all I'm asking. Just not to pass a law and then be waiting around another 3 years to figure out what's going on with our property here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. I'm just doing a quick time check. It's 12:33, so we'd only have time for one more to wrap up public comment. I don't see any other hands. I'm just going to give it a couple seconds to see if anyone else raises their hand. Okay, there's our last one, Ursula. Are you able to unmute yourself? Ursula, you should be able to. Okay, we are going to move on to the last hand raise is Carol Green.
I would just like to comment on the few things that people have already said, and that is the stress that is being caused by the uncertainty to homeowners in my neighborhood, thinking it's we're going to lose our homes for very little money, and not knowing what is happening is really very stressful on a lot of people. We have a lot of seniors in our neighborhood who don't know where they're going to go. And I think making a decision, I don't want it to be on my house. I live in Thurston County, but I think something needs to be decided because people really are concerned, and it's stressful for all of us. That's it.
Great, thank you, Carol. Thank you all for participating in the public comment. Members of the public who didn't get a chance to speak, you can always email your comments and questions to cacc@wasdot.wa.gov. This concludes public comment, and now I will turn it over to Lindsay from PRR to go over some of the public engagement updates.
Okay, sorry, my slide advance button and unmute button are on different screens. So I am going to try to just spend a few minutes on public engagement updates to leave a little bit of time for questions from any commission members at the end. Everything that I'm covering here, commission members have already received over email, but we'll just do a quick recap to get everyone up to speed before we move on into discussion and new information. So this first slide, I know there's a lot on here, is covering public engagement to date. This is an overview of the opportunities we've provided and the level of input that we've heard. The response has been really tremendous, and we are so appreciative of the time and effort community members have put into sharing their thoughts with us. Since we got started on the project, we have fielded a statistically representative survey that went to 33,000 households. We've held 3 online open houses with more than 50,000 users. We received answers, 64,537 multiple choice question answers, and more than 14,000 open-ended comments through those online open houses. 393 people attended 2 series of virtual public meetings, and we had 419 attendees at a series of virtual drop-in sessions. Our listserv goes out to 920 subscribers. We've put out several infographics like the snippet of the one you can see on the screen. Christina and her team and Warren have held dozens of briefings for community groups, given media interviews, and worked with local government and elected officials. We've held 4 meetings of our community-based organization working group, and the CACC inbox has had more than 2,500 emails received. So we have had a tremendous amount of input throughout this process. Most recently, we held an online open house in March looking for input before this meeting. So that open house was up March 1st through the 22nd, and we held a virtual public meeting on March 8th and March 9th. As with prior open houses, we had quite a few different language options, and we had a phone hotline version for folks who could not access the online version. We received 349 comments for that open house from nearly 14,000 unique users. And you can see here, most of the input consistent with the last open house we had was about the sites currently being studied by the commission. We also heard quite a bit of support for a Yakima location, support for high-speed rail, opposition to any aviation expansion due to environmental concerns, frustration about the process, or support for restarting with new legislation, and support for a location in Olympia. This is all included in quite a bit more detail in the report you all received earlier this week. But all this really boils down to this really short statement that overwhelmingly we have heard that people want the state to meet the demand for aviation, particularly in a way that is environmentally sustainable. And also, most people say they do not want a new airport in their backyard. So that's kind of the 1-sentence summary of what we have heard. I think I've got maybe 2 minutes left on my agenda if any commission members have questions.
Yeah, this is Steve, if we have a minute, Steve Edmiston. Thanks for that. I was looking back earlier this morning at the results and presentation for the work that we did in December 2021 and that you were able to present upon. And a lot of that work, obviously didn't relate to the 3 sites, right? It was earlier, they hadn't been sifted through, but these were general numbers. And I feel in retrospect, in looking back at them, they're still extraordinary numbers. 96% of our, back then we had 17,000 users and 28,000 views, but we had 96% of the recommendations was that the CACC should be environmentally responsible. That, if you throw all those in, it was just really big numbers, and that was 71%, that was extremely important. I guess, and it just goes on and on. I mean, the people that responded were worried about the environment. They were worried about public health. And I think that's certainly been true now in the more recent work that we've done. What can you tell us? Okay, I'm a commissioner and I'm supposed to do something with this data. What have you learned that you can share with me and other commissioners that helps us make it actionable if we're looking at 3 sites today? And for example, if Yakima was a site, you might tell us everybody wants Yakima, based on what the public has said, but Yakima's not on the table. So based on what the public has said, is there anything you can use this information for to help us make a decision between 3 sites?
Sure. Yeah.
That's a tough question.
It is a tough question. And I'm going to throw in a 4th site. And, Christina, please feel free to come off mute and chime in here. But I would say There are certainly people who have said that they are opposed to expanding Payne Field. But by and large, we've seen support for expanding capacity at Payne Field. So that's not one of the 3 greenfields that you asked about, but that feels noteworthy. You know, people have really encouraged us to use existing airports, which we all know you all have been through studying, you know, what the options are with existing airports in Washington, and that there's not a lot of opportunity there, but that's a thing we've heard really consistently. I would say among the 3 greenfield sites, in terms of public input, I don't see a strong difference in terms of numbers for or against any of those 3 sites. That's not really helpful for you. I'm sorry.
It is helpful. It is helpful to me if I can interpret what you're saying is we don't have from a public engagement perspective, based on the work that we've done, something that helps us make that decision between the 3 sites. Because we can't talk about Yakima, we can't talk about Payne Field. We can only talk at this point about the 3 sites that are under consideration. So is that fair? And I'm sorry, I mean,
Yeah.
Today's the meeting where we get to push back and we got to get to the rub. I'm hearing this as we don't have information that we've collected that's going to help any commissioner say, as between these sites, from a public engagement and feedback, that we have a clear choice. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Christina, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I also think it's, you know, as Lindsay said, people want an airport. They just don't want it in their backyard. So that's also something that's tough to deal with as well. I mean, no one wants an airport in their backyard. However, there is this existing problem that people do want us to fix, although keeping environmental concerns in mind as well. But yeah, it's tough. And we've heard a lot from the public, but as Lindsay said, I think we had a lot of good data that really shows what the public wants, and yeah, just do our best with the data.
Well, thank you. I took too much of your time and the commission's time. I appreciate your responsiveness.
Larry, I think you wanted to say something?
Just wanted to keep us on track. Steve's got some great questions and input, but it wasn't really about public engagement. I want to make sure we save all that good stuff for when we get into the appropriate topic area in the agenda.
Thanks, Larry.
I think probably my 5 minutes are up now, so I will send it on to Warren.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Christina, for facilitating the public comment period. I do appreciate everyone that took the time to make a public comment, and we continue to seek your engagement and input through our email address and through our website. Moving on in the agenda, I want to speak very briefly with regard to the recap of input from local governments and tribal nations. We've heard the public engagement piece already. And in addition to the 5 call-in sessions that we hosted for the public over the last 60 to 90 days, I personally was involved with 16 presentations to governments, municipal agencies, and/or supporting transportation policy board committees and/or community-based organizations. And including that feedback and that level of discussion, we've also, as a commission, received direct letters from the National Park Service, the Thurston Chamber, South Pierce Fire, the Squaxin Island Tribe, the Nisqually Tribe, the City of Lakewood, and all Thurston governments, including the city, county, and port governments represented in Thurston County. And the point I wish to share is that not a single local government or tribal nation, and of the tribal nations, there are actually 4, Squaxin Island, Nisqually, Puyallup, and the Cowlitz, are in favor of any of the 3 identified greenfield sites that the commission looked at for further analysis back last September. On the other side of the pendulum swing is the city of Yakima, who has roundly stood up and said, we would like to be considered as the preferred commercial aviation facility. It is not one of the sites that had been studied by the aviation system plan. And as a result, the CAC has limited data to that, but at least there is one local government that has raised its hand, not among the Pearson, Thurston, Greenfield sites, of course, but certainly is something to bring to the attention of the commission. Next slide, please. With regard to the legislative update, I believe as probably most of the attendees on this meeting are well aware, there is new legislation pending before the State House. It is engrossed substitute House Bill 1791. The House passed this legislation on March 8th via the House Transportation Committee by a vote of 88-9. The Senate Transportation Committee conducted its hearing on March 21st, and a Senate executive session on this bill is planned for April 4th at 11:30 in the morning. The key issues with regard to this legislative update, a few things to keep in mind. Until this legislation is passed by both houses and enacted into law by the governor's signature, the existing authority and law that dictates the work of this commission will continue unfettered. We have a responsibility to make a recommendation to the legislature no later than June 15th. So this commission will continue its work until we learn otherwise. So I think that's an important step to make. There are substantive changes. There's a lot of similarities in the new legislation to our existing commercial work, but the new group will be called the Commercial Aviation Work Group. It will have 19 voting members instead of 15. It expands the community outreach and potential. It does change the language slightly with regard to counties over 2 million, that specifically the recommendations cannot consider airports, existing airports owned by a port or a county. That does open up the door somewhat to and lessen the restrictions that are imposed on this body by the existing law. The military restriction, however, is retained, and there are no deliverables by that work group other than to submit a report to the legislature on its analysis come January of 2024. So that bill continues to proceed. We will watch and see what happens, but in the meantime, we still have the authority to operate as we have for the last 3.5 years. Next slide, please. Now it comes to the selection of a new commission chair. I mentioned previously, and before I get into that, I do want to recognize we had 2 additional commission members join the meeting here in this last hour. Andrea Goodpasture has joined the meeting as a voting member, and Representative Tom Dent has joined the meeting as a non-voting member. Right now, that means we have 10 voting members present, 5 non-voting members present, a total of 15 members of the commission, of which there are 23 currently appointed members. That gives us a percentage attendance of 65% of the commission members right now. So moving forward into this item, I mentioned previously that the commission conducts its business under a self-written by the commission charter that was adopted January 6, 2022. The statutory authority for the commission does not direct how we go about doing our work or even require a chair, but we felt as a commission body that it was appropriate to do so. And the thought process was to have a commission chair as a voting member and the vice chair as a non-voting member. I think that has served the commission well. David Fleckenstein, as the director of WSDOT Aviation, was selected as the voting member chair, and I, representing as a non-voting member of the Washington State Aviation Alliance, was elected by the commission as the vice chair. A quorum does not apply to this decision. It is a simple majority vote of all commission members, both voting and non-voting. And I will say that my personal viewpoint is that I believe that the commission is well served by having a voting member in the chair role. I have found this position, unexpected as it was, to be highly rewarding and challenging at the same time. And going forward, my preference would be, in a perfect world, that a voting member would resume the chair position. However, recognizing that we literally only have a little over 3 months, in fact, the CAC literally sunsets by statutory authority on June 30th of this year, there is only 3 months remaining in the CAC's work. So if in fact it is the will of the majority to continue the status quo, I would reluctantly accept that particular position. So I will leave that up to the commission members. And at this time, I will open up the floor for nominations for acting or for permanent commission chair.
This is Lauren, Lauren Carr. I would like to say, and that I appreciate first your comment and how well or how effective the structure has been. But I think the key, as you mentioned, is with the clock ticking and only 3 months to go, that it is not necessarily the best idea to change horses midstream. And while you indicated you would do so reluctantly, it's my belief that we would probably be best served by someone who's already been serving in the capacity, at least as vice chair, to continue as the chairperson. And if you are willing to do so, I would nominate you to remain for the remaining 3 months of the term of the commission.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Are there any other nominations from the floor?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we close nominations and call for the question.
Okay, Mr. Crowder has made a motion. Is there a second to close nominations?
Second.
Tony Bean has seconded. Is there any discussion on closing the nominations? By acclamation then, let's call for the vote. All in favor of closing nominations, say so by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? With only one nominee and nominations disclosed, if it's agreeable, we can either accept the motion or just by acclamation, just accept the fact that I have been appointed by the commission as permanent chair.
I would move that we do that separately and so that it's just preserved in the record that the commission unanimously recommends Warren Hendrickson to assume the role of chair instead of acting chair. So to make that in the form of a motion, if someone would second that.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Crowder has made the motion to appoint Warren Hendrickson as permanent chair of the commission by acclamation. Mark Glesian has seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor then say so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that vote of confidence. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Warren.
Next slide, please. Okay, on to the next steps. The first thing I would like to do is validate exactly where we are with regard to the quorum. I am going to go ahead and call out the voting members one more time, not the voting members just in the interest of saving time, but I do want to make sure that we know exactly at this point in time where we are with regard to the number of voting members present. So voting members, if you would please unmute yourselves and this time, Lauren, once again, you are at the top of the alphabetical list. So Lauren Carr, please.
Present.
Steve Edmiston.
Here.
Mark Glesian.
Here.
Andrea Goodpasture.
Here.
Wendy Janway. Eric Johnson.
Here.
Shane Jones.
Present.
Larry Crowder.
Present.
Sherrod Kunkel.
Here.
Jim Kuntz.
Here.
Robin Toth.
Here.
And Bryce Yaran. Okay, we are still at 10 voting members. I wish to propose this now to the commission before we go any further. quorum, as we go forward and consider a recommendation, recognizing that some of the voting members that are currently here now will need to leave the meeting in a little over an hour. So we have about 1 hour to discuss this. The key issue before us in terms of a recommendation is it requires 9 affirmative votes. The commission self-imposed and established, not by legislation, not by law, by authority, but just for our internal working purposes, a minimum quorum of 12. Recognizing that with 15 voting members planned, that at any point in time, there would be some voting members that would not be available. And by having a hard recommendation of 9 affirmative votes for any final recommendation that was made in each of the 3 phases, we've met the criteria that the legislation imposed of beating a final recommendation with a 60% majority. 60% of 15 voting members is 9. So that number, and as the commission has always accepted, has been relatively sacred. The actual number for a quorum has been one that the commission itself imposed by a simple majority vote of all voting and non-voting members. So the question before us now is, should we continue with that practice, or should we consider either changing or abolishing the quorum requirements, recognizing that we still would have to have 9 affirmative votes for a decision? And the reason I offer this to the commission members as something to consider, this was not on the agenda, it was not expected. We expected to have 12 voting members present today. That has not happened. And as we go forward, recognizing that we only have less than literally 2 months before a final decision has to be made so that there's time to write a report to the legislature, is can we expect any significant changes in that? We still have 2 appointments that are on the governor's desk that haven't been acted. They may or may not be, depending upon how this particular legislative proceeds and the tasks and duties of the governor's office to address those. And so if we delay, we may not have the opportunity to be in a different place than what we are today. And so the first question I would just ask the commission is, do we want to maintain the existing quorum, or do we want to consider an amendment at this meeting of a change to the charter that would then open up the opportunity for a quorum or at least 9 affirmative votes to be achieved today? And with that, I will open it up for discussion.
Warren, this is Mark. Do we actually need a quorum to be able to change that?
We don't need a quorum to do that, because by our charter, I want to come back to the original wording of that in our charter, and I will read it verbatim. In decision-making, and I quote directly from the charter at the bottom of page 3, for those votes, quote, identifying a preferred location for a new primary commercial aviation facility, voting shall be restricted to voting members. The minimum quorum of voting members shall be 12. The minimum number of affirmative votes to achieve a final decision shall be 9. And these specific votes are recommending a final short list of no more than 6 locations by February 15, 2022. We have done that. Identifying the top two locations from the final 6 locations by October 15, 2022. We have done that. And the only remaining vote that requires a quorum before us is identifying a single preferred location for a new primary commercial aviation facility by June 15th. No other action before the commission, therefore, by our own charter, requires a quorum.
Thank you. So my suggestion that we consider is that we make the 9 votes and/or the quorum an and/or situation. That they both do not need to be true. That if there's a quorum of 12, then whatever action is taken is taken. But if there's affirmative votes of 9, then that's then that carries the day.
Okay. Given that we have sufficient members on board today with 65% attendance to consider that, would you like to put that in the form of a motion?
Before he does, may I make a comment?
Please do.
That I have no trouble with us making the change. It certainly seems like that's well within the charter and would be acceptable. I do not think we should make that change and then take action based on that change today, given that there are members absent that may have altered their schedule or made some other arrangements to be present for an actionable item. Does that make sense? Am I stating what I'm trying? Is what I'm trying to state making sense? We shouldn't make the change to the requirement today and then take action based on that change at the same time, because that doesn't provide an opportunity for the members that are absent to have participated in the vote to make the change, which kind of unduly takes away their ability to vote on an actual actionable item. Is that clear?
Yes, yeah, I believe I understand
Okay.
exactly where you're coming from. It does put the cart before the horse. It seems, and I think there would be, quite honestly, the CAC could be subject to criticism for making an expedient change, simply be recognizing the nature of the beast. But taking action, the analogy I would give, for example, if an elected commission wishes to consider a future pay raise, as just one example, may not be the best, that type of decision can only apply to future commissions, not the existing one. And so the end result is if there was any action to be taken today, then it would not, if I'm reading you correctly, Lauren, would not apply to today's meeting, but would apply to a future meeting.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
My only counterpoint to that is that I believe, Warren, that you and the staff have made it abundantly clear that a quorum today was highly preferred, and that all of us have made, high degree of effort in one way or another to be here. So I guess I mildly object to the assertion that we haven't given people an opportunity to express themselves as voting members.
Thank you, Mark. What other input might there be from the floor?
I guess I would join the remark one prior, the Mark 2 remarks ago. I just generally am concerned about simplifying or making it easier to cast a vote or find a quorum when there's obviously time pressure upon us to take action. And I think that does expose the CAC to criticism, and it may well be fair criticism. And if we take action and it's, the headline is CAC changes rules to get to a vote, that's not a good headline, and nor is it good practice. I think we may struggle to have another meeting, but that's a better struggle than making voting today more expedient. And that's just my thought. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Rudy.
Yes, I just had a question. What happens if we reach June 15th and by that time we've not been able to assimilate a quorum and make a recommendation as prescribed? What is the consequence? And the only reason I ask that, we don't know. There may be people, voting members, who are taking advantage of the parliamentary process and the rules to not have to cast a vote. I don't know that might be the case, but whether that's true or not, if we get to June 15th and we've been unable to have a quorum and fulfill the recommendation in the legislation, what's the consequence?
Would anyone have an opinion on that? From my position, the consequence would be is if we fail to have a quorum, if we fail to have 9 affirmative votes to reach a recommendation to the legislature, then our report would so indicate, and that we weren't able to comply with the internal governing documents that the commission has created, nor were we able to make a final recommendation to a 60% majority that the original founding law that created the commission requires. So it would be in the task would fall uncompleted, but it would be I believe in complete compliance with what the legislature requires and what our own internal governing documents has established.
I'm not sure that's a great headline either, but I understand.
Representative Yan?
Thank you, Warren. So you're right. You're right on what you've said there. I think from the legislature's point of view, we believe that the legislation in House Bill 1791 is going to pass. You know, we have the support. It's moving as we've kind of wished it will. So, and once it's signed, then the CACC will no longer be in existence. So that is our plan from here, because of, you know, everything that has happened. We want to transition to that new organization. So I think while we don't have a real hard answer for you, if you don't have if you can't comply with the rules of this organization, then you can't comply, and then therefore you wouldn't be able to make a recommendation. So I think that's the way it is.
Thank you, Representative Dan, for that comment. Stroud Kumpel, please. You may need to unmute, Stroud. Sorry.
I think that the way we're set up now, if you're not in the majority, or you don't want a decision to be made, the easiest way to voice that is to not show up at the meeting. Because without the quorum, you can't take the vote, even if you have, if you have 11 positive votes, if you don't have 12, there's no vote.
Well, and this is Lauren, if I can clarify, I'm not against making the change to allow for the vote to be made more easily. I'm just against making the change and taking action to do upon that change in the exact same meeting.
Lauren, I think that's an excellent point, and it's why I wanted to put it on the table, because these are the thoughts that occurred to me as well. And I support that position. I think if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly from the comments that have been made so far, we went into this meeting today with a quorum of 12 required. We have not met that bar, and therefore we cannot take action today, even though we do have 10 voting members present. I think there's good practice, and it makes good sense, particularly with regard to the image of the commission and how we go about doing our business and our relationship with the public and our local governments, that we adhere to the ground rules that we have set up. That being said, that would govern then today's meeting. Then the question then becomes is, should the commission maintain that same quorum requirement for a future meeting? And that is probably then the question that is before us right now. Any comments on that? Shane, please.
Thanks for raising it, Warren. And Lauren, I agree with Lauren's position, Steve, that I think it's not proper to make the change here and then make a decision at this same meeting. However, it is within the governance structure for us to make the change and to therefore give reasonable notice to the commission members. So at the next meeting, we could take action under the new adopted principles. So I support moving forward with that recommendation.
And Steve here, and I can support that too, because I think that process is really a transparent process and everybody can plan for it. So
I would agree, Steve. I think one of the things that over these last several months, that in the position that I have found myself in, is that being open and transparent is a key to success. Still, this is a Herculean task that is still not well received by, as we have seen, our local governments and especially the public. But we have to be very clean about how we go about doing our business in spite of reaching very difficult decisions. So with that, we do not have a quorum today. We will not take action today. We will certainly continue the discussion over this next period of time. I would therefore then entertain a motion to change the quorum for meetings that take place by the commission after today.
Warren, this is Lauren. I so move.
And can you be specific about exactly what motion you're making in terms
yes,
of?
I'm
is it
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Is it a specific number that you're looking at, or just how would you address the quorum?
I would address the point that it needs to be the 9. You must have a minimum of 9 voting members as set by the original legislation.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor that the quorum be changed for future CAC meetings from 12 to 9. Is there a second?
Second.
And Stroud, was that Stroud that made the second? I missed it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Stroud. Is there any additional discussion? It has been moved and seconded that we change the quorum for future CAC meetings from 12 to 9. That still meets the 60% bar required by the legislation so that it keeps us consistent with the law. Any discussion?
Steve here, Warren, is that also, the motion didn't come from you, but was that what your original recommendation was?
I didn't make a recommendation, quite honestly, because I didn't want to lead the commission down a path.
Can you comment on that? Could you
please
comment
do.
on how you feel
Please
about
do.
it? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Steve, were you going to add something to the discussion?
I'm sorry, Warren. I was just wanting to make sure you didn't want to lead the commission in that respect, but is this something that is this the right way to go about it from your perspective?
From my opinion, as the chair of the organization and as a non-voting member, but also as the chair of the commission, I still feel personally a responsibility to meet the intent of the law, and the law states that we should make a recommendation. Now that recommendation can take a number of forms. We're going to get into that here very shortly in terms of what direction that recommendation should be. But I think that's why the commission was established, and that was the intent. And we should do our level-headed best by doing that. I think by changing this particular quorum requirement down to that 60% majority, we have then created an internal working document, still met the requirements of the law, and it may allow the commission to go ahead and accomplish its legislatively imposed objective. So I think this motion, from my perspective, would be an appropriate one to approve. Is there any other discussion on this motion? Okay, with that, we have a motion and a second that the quorum for future CAC meetings be changed from 12 voting members to 9. Call for the vote. All in favor, please acknowledge so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And this is a vote that can be taken by non-voting. This is all commission members, both voting and non-voting. So I didn't phrase that to start with, so let me repeat the call for the vote. All in favor, acknowledge by saying aye.
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 Are there any commission members opposed? Okay, the motion is carried, and in the future, we will have a minimum quorum of 9. I appreciate the commission's work on this. Thank you. So with that, let's go into the next steps. We will not make a final decision today, but this is a good opportunity to tee up some additional thoughts. So with that, I'm recognizing the time. We are at 1:15. Given that we don't longer require a quorum to make decisions today, this is the part early on where I directed that we may amend the agenda, because it would be helpful, I believe, for commission members to see the Kimley-Horn presentation with regard to the Greenfield site updates, airspace analysis, and air cargo forecasts. So as a result, I will take the liberty of amending the agenda, and we will move into that process now. And then the commission discussion on next steps will then follow that presentation. So as I introduce then the Kimley-Horn team, the first two preceding thoughts that I want to repeat from what I made earlier. The first is, and we heard some of this referred to in the public comments, But the work of the Aviation System Plan Update Consultant Team, led by Kimley Horn, is not the work of the CAC. It is a system plan update that is being done under the aegis of WSDOT Aviation, but its data has been very helpful to us. So the information that you're seeing does refer to the statewide basis and the effort. We are observers and energetic and enthusiastic participants in the information provided, but it is not the work of the CAC. The CAC was not funded for such independent analysis and research, and we've been able to leverage the work of WSDOT Aviation's Aviation System Plan Update for our assistance. The second piece, I do want to again remind everyone that when we talk about greenfield sites and greenfield airports, we're talking about locations that simply do not have an existing airport. So with that, allow me to introduce David Williams, Project Manager for Kimley Horn and the Aviation System Plan Update. And David, I will leave it now to you and your team for this next 45 minutes or so. And David, I see you on the screen, but you are muted.
There you go, off mute.
Beautiful.
All right, thanks, Warren, appreciate it. And good afternoon, all. So we have, as Warren said, we've developed a presentation regarding the material we've been preparing under the WASP study for the state DOT. The presentation should be around 35 or 40 minutes, and we should have time at the end of that as well to be able to answer any questions the commission members may have on the presentation. All right, so in the September 2022 CAC meeting, as part of our WASP update, we said there were going to be several areas that we were going to do additional analysis on the final greenfield sites, the finalist sites that were selected. We've completed that work and wanted to prepare some of that information and share with you guys today. So what we'll do today is cover the Greenfield Airport secondary screening analysis, covered a number of topics. We'll talk about the airspace review that we've performed for the study as well. And then we'll provide some information on some of the air cargo forecasting that we have completed. So thanks for the introduction, Warren, but I want to quickly introduce our team so you know who's here. Help with me presenting today. So we have Pam Cadell Adams, a project principal, presenting with me. Mike Yablonsky will be presenting on the airspace, and Ken Bukakis, air cargo forecasting, will be presenting from Recondo, and then myself, David Williams, our project manager. And from that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Pam, for the next section here.
Thanks, David. Moving to the next slide. During prior CAC meetings, we presented preliminary analysis on 10 greenfield sites conducted during the Washington Aviation System Plan, or WASP. During the last CAC meeting in September, 3 of those greenfield sites were identified for further analysis or secondary screening: Pierce County Central and Pierce County East, as well as Thurston County Central, as shown on the map. The WASP continued to analyze the technical feasibility of a King County Southeast site, recognizing that this is not part of the CAC's charge, but is part of the aviation system plan. The secondary screening analysis delved deeper into each site with additional evaluation of specific factors and measures. The secondary screening analyzed environmental factors, transportation access to the various sites, and the impacts to infrastructure that we'll discuss in a bit. A separate review of airspace was also conducted. The results of the analysis for each site will be presented later by site, except for airspace, which we presented separately, including the impacts to the military. On the next slide, the secondary screening process was conducted similar to the preliminary screening, with 4 of the same criterion categories as shown on the left. However, there was no evaluation of the market factors in this secondary screening, as that analysis was previously presented and was used to inform the selection of the finalist greenfield sites. That's when we identified the million annual passengers that could be accommodated at each of the greenfield sites. Each criterion category has specific evaluation elements and measures, depending on the impacts that we are analyzing. Many of the measures were chosen based on input received to date and on analysis that could best inform the comparison of the remaining greenfield sites. Specifically, under operational capability and capacity potential, the focus was purely on airspace impacts and constraints, which, as I noted, will be discussed later. 4 measures were used to evaluate these impacts, with the specific measurements presented on a separate slide. For ground access, we looked both at ground transportation and transit connectivity. In terms of development costs, the focus was on the cost of providing utilities such as power, water, and fiber internet to each site. And then finally, there are 4 categories of potential environmental impacts, including farmlands, aquifers and water supply, tribal interests, and impacts to essential public facilities. The following slide presents descriptions of the measures other than the airspace, again, which is presented later with descriptions of each of those. So this slide presents the measures and the specific descriptions on how each was analyzed for the site. The analysis primarily utilized publicly available information to determine the impacts. Starting with highway connectivity, we measured the average distance to new highway required to connect to the nearest divided highway in terms of miles. For passenger rail connectivity, we looked at the distance to the nearest passenger rail station and the amount of new rail that would be required to connect to an existing line, again, in terms of miles. We looked at the distance in miles to the nearest operational power station or high voltage substation for power utilities. For water, we looked at the distance to the nearest water main. For fiber internet, the distance to the nearest fiber internet connection. For farmland impacts, we looked at the amount of farmlands within each site in terms of the number of acres. For critical aquifer recharge areas or CARAs, we looked at the amount in terms of acres of CARAs within each site. Similarly, for the wellhead protection areas, we looked at the amount of 10-year wellhead protection areas or WHPAs within each site. For tribal fishing rights, we looked at the length of the rivers within the statewide Washington Integrated Fish Distribution System, which is based on the feature classes of different single streams within the region. For landfills, we looked at the miles and the distance to the nearest active landfill. And then finally, for high voltage power lines, we looked at the length in terms of miles of high voltage power lines that were intersecting each site. So each of these measures was analyzed for each of the sites. And David will now go through the analysis for each individual site with a summary for each as he goes through. David?
All right, thank you, Pam. So as Pam said, we looked at that information for each of the 3 sites. And to present to you the information today, we essentially developed a couple of slides for each site. They're set up the same format. The first slide shows the map. This map we've shown in previous presentations that really orient you to the location. And then like we've done in previous presentations, some of the features that we consider potentially compatible with greenfield site development in some areas that they are impediments to implementation. And then the second slide is going to show the detailed scoring and our ranking of each of those sites for each of those categories. So this is the first one. This is the Pierce County East site. And this one's, I think a lot of you are familiar with it, near Highway 161, just south of Graham. And so for this site, as far as being compatible features, less than half a mile of rivers with the SWIFD fish presence within the site. That's the second least of any of those finalist sites we evaluated. And then this one also requires about 1.7 miles of new rail to be constructed to connect to an existing rail corridor. And that's also the least of any of the sites that we evaluated. This site has 6.1 miles of high voltage transmission lines, which is the most of any of the sites. It also has 528 acres of farmlands, and that's within the site, and that's also the most of all the sites we evaluated. So this slide, as I mentioned, this is the scoring for Pierce County East of when we went and measured each of those criteria. What we've put there in the box to the far right under the results column shows either green scoring, yellow scoring, and red scoring. That's kind of our weighted scoring in comparison to each of the different sites. And those numbers in the box represents the measurements for each of those categories that were described earlier. So again, the Pierce County East site, good connection of passenger rail, no impacted documented critical aquifer recharge areas, and more of limited impact to the tribal fishing rights as far as the stream. As far as challenges to this site, as noted here, significant impacts to farmlands. There's also moderate impact as far as access for highway connectivity and impact to wellhead protection areas. All right, I'm going to move to the Pierce County Central. And this site is near State Route 7, south of Spanway, northeast of Yelm. As far as compatible features, this site had no rivers with the documented or presumed SWIFD fish presence within the site. It's the only site that did not have that within the limits. And this site is only 1.2 miles to the nearest high voltage substation, so close access for power and the closest for any of the sites. Challenges to this site, 17 miles from the nearest divided highway connection. That is the furthest of all the sites. And it's also 6 miles from the nearest potable water site. Again, also furthest from any of the sites. Changing to the slide, talking through all the results for the Pierce County Central location. Again, red, yellow, and green scoring as comparative, along with the actual numbers and information that we actually calculated and analyzed. Again, some compatible features, just good opportunity for electrical and telecommunications, limited to no impact on critical aquifer recharge areas. As far as impediments, as we talked before, high voltage power lines, moderate impacts to passenger rail connectivity, and then moderate impact to farmlands on this site. All right, I'm going to go to the third site. That's our Thurston County Central. This site is east of Olympia, north of Tenino in Thurston County. Again, this site has some compatible features. It's about just under 3 miles from the nearest Amtrak commuter rail line. That's the closest of any of the sites. It has about 124 acres of farmlands within the site area, which happens to be the fewest of any of the sites evaluated. Challenges, nearly 2,000 acres of the site is impacted by the critical aquifer recharge areas, and then another nearly 750 acres of wellhead protection areas on this site. And and for both those categories, those are most of any of the different sites that we evaluated. All right, and then here's the final kind of layout and scoring of the Thurston County Central with all the results and the numbers used. A couple other areas that were positive from a standpoint of the nearest access to the 4-lane highway of all the sites evaluated, and good access to telecommunication infrastructure. In this case, there happens to be moderate to poor accessibility to either electrical utilities and power, along with the other elements we described earlier. So last slide, as far as greenfield site and the secondary screening work we've done, it really is a summary slide, able to put the same measurements that we evaluated for each of those sites, and we put them side by side. The picture it paints when you look through it is that each site has some elements that are really compatible and could facilitate for greenfield site development. And each site has some areas that definitely have some impediments to implementation and challenges for each of those sites. ultimately, no, we don't have a clean, clear, perfect site at this point. From here, I'm going to turn this over to Mike and let Mike talk through some of the airspace analysis that we've completed on the project.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, for airspace analysis, the first major point that we wanted to emphasize is that none of the existing airspace, whether it's civilian, military, or any of that, has been changed or modified or adjusted for this analysis. So all the existing airspace that is in the system is the same. So we didn't do anything to that or proposed any changes for that airspace. The new Greenfield Airport do assume that we require Class C airspace, loosely based off of Naval Air Station Whibley Island Class C airspace that I'll show here in a subsequent slide. We developed this model using a FAA tool called Targets, which is standard for airspace design, route, and procedure development. And each site consists of 4 measures that we have over here on the right in the table. Essentially, airspace complexity. So this is where airspace could be cut out from a joint. You can have cutouts from adjacent airspace, or what's called shelving. Whereas you think of Class C and Class B airspaces as upside down wedding cakes. You got to fit all the pieces in to make it a consistent airspace and not have gaps, which we'll show in some pictures coming up here. We also evaluated airspace terrain penetration. So again, with the Targets tool, we put these airspace volumes into the tool, and from there we can load terrain in and then look at how much of that airspace is impacted by terrain, or how much of that airspace would not be usable because of terrain, and for safety concerns and things like that. We also evaluate the military operations. We had several meetings and coordinated with military stakeholders with the existing airspace, and if we had integration of proposed Class C airspace, how would that impact their operations in the region for different types of missions that the military conducts in the special use airspace they have. We also look at runway procedure access, and again, this is where we laid in what they call standard instrument departures and standard instrument arrival routes that were overlaid in the Targets design software. And you can think of these routes as the highways in the sky that would connect these greenfield airports to the rest of the national airspace system. So not only do we put the airspace in, but we have to look at, how do we get aircraft in and out of that airspace, given that we have current routes from Sea-Tac and the other airports in the area. Next slide, please. So reviewing the airspace in the area, the primary airspace that provides guidance and control in the region is the Seattle TRACON, which is basically the terminal radar approach control facility from the FAA, and also known as S46. And that's the green airspace here, outlining everything on the graphic on the right-hand side. And then the next airspace over Sea-Tac is the Class B airspace, which is the blue-colored airspace that's around the airport, and that's the multi-shelved airspace. If you flipped it upside down, it would look like an upside-down wedding cake kind of structure. And the Naval Air Station at Whibley Island is Class C, and that's up to the top of the diagram. So that's a typical Class C airspace where we have an inner and an outer section, again, with the shelves and ceilings and different pieces there. And then there's also several Class D airspaces within the region. All the way starting from the bottom, you have Olympia and the Joint Base McCord-Lewis, and you have Painfield and Renton. So there's a lot of complex airspace that's currently in the system. And I believe the FAA mentioned they did do a Class B redesign on Seattle a few years back. So it's a very involved and complicated process. And also there's military operations areas, which are known as MOAs. And these support training routes, parachute jump zones, flight testing, helicopter operations, all that. And there's several up to the north that the Navy uses, and down to the south you have Rainier and what's called the R6703 complex, which is a right near Olympia, between the Thurston proposed site and Pierce County sites, as you'll see in more detail. Next slide, please. So now we'll go through each of the sites, starting with Pierce County East. And again, over in the diagram on the right-hand side, and these are sorry, on the left-hand side of the table, here's our measures. You know, again, the airspace complexity, terrain penetration, military operations, runway procedure access. And this is how they were scored based on meetings with stakeholders and evaluating the different implications of each of these pieces. So all four of these are judged to have significant impact. If we go over to the diagram on the right-hand side, up in the corner, you have a diagram of the terrain penetration of Pierce County East, and this is for the lower floor of the Class C airspace. It'd be about 1,200 feet, and if you notice to the east southeast area, there's a significant reduction of air availability of airspace due to terrain. Again, and the overall diagram shows the blue is the Class B airspace from Seattle, and then we have a cutout here that shows, again, in order to make this airspace fit into that particular area over the site, we have to cut out some shelves and all that underneath it. And then there's also Class D and some of the special use airspace over there that we have to do, further complicating shelving within this airspace, which again resulted into a score of significant impact for that. Also, to design the procedures, due to the close proximity of Seattle and other operations, military and all that, it would require, there are significant impacts if we were to put in the departure and arrival procedures there to integrate in with all the current other operations in the area right now. Next slide. Similarly for Pierce County Central, all of them scored significant impact for the same four metrics with the exception of the terrain penetration. There is some off to the east and the southeast, not as much, but also on the west side of that proposed airspace, there is a significant cutout due to the special use airspace for the military from Rainier and our 6703 complex. There's also complicated shelving due to Joint Base McCord Class D airspace and some shelving on the top from the Seattle Class B to make that airspace fit in. And again, this isn't a actual airspace design. This is just what would have to happen to that airspace in order to fit into, like fitting in a piece of a puzzle. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally for Thurston County Central, again, there's significant significant impacts for all four metrics with the exception of airspace penetration. There's only off to the southeast corner, there's some terrain if you open in the upper left-hand corner in the diagram. But we also have Olympia Class D airspace, which is a cutout below this airspace. And again, and then on the northwest, or should I say northeast side, east side, you have the special use airspace again from the military. So again, your usable Class C airspace, given all the adjacent airspaces, and then also, and not as much from Seattle Class B airspace because it's further away. But again, your usable airspaces would have significant impacts in as far as interaction with all the other things. And again, with procedural access, you'd have to design arrival departure procedures into that airspace to, again, get the aircraft into the national airspace system, and significant impact to military operations when we talk with the military stakeholders with their different types of missions and things they conduct in that area. So this airspace, again, was scored significant impacts there with the exception of the terrain.
This is Lauren Carr. Is it acceptable to ask a question now, or is it more appropriate to wait to the end?
Lauren, if you don't mind, let us get through all of it, and then it'd be great to come circle back and go through any questions.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And similar to what David showed, this is the overall scoring for the all three sites with the four measures. And again, there is significant impacts with the existing airspace structure. One important thing is when we spoke with the FAA in some of our meetings and some of the other folks is these routes and things can be designed, but again, it require a lot of coordination with stakeholders, military, civilian, community, in the whole area to make this work. Because obviously when you're designing airspace and procedures, safety is the #1 concern. Again, given all the other operations that are currently in the airspace with Sea-Tac and the satellite airports, in the region, and terrain and other things. And again, airspace design is it's highly complex. requires specialized study. The FAA's had Metroplex study. That's many other major metropolitan areas around the country they've been doing for the last 10 years or so. And again, those are very specialized studies that require a lot of stakeholders' expertise and all that to understand, how to design these routes and make operations safe. And with that, we will pass it on to Ken.
Very good. Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. As we get into the discussion on the air cargo forecast, I'd like to spend the first couple slides covering some of the important recent air cargo industry trends and key market drivers, so we all understand what's influencing our state's air cargo market. In the top graphic here, an interesting fact of the worldwide air cargo industry is that only about 1% of the world's trade tonnage is carried by air cargo. But if you look at the second pie, a little over 1/3, 33% of the world's trade value is accommodated by air cargo. So that kind of gives an understanding or an insight into the characteristics of the perishable nature, time critical, just in time, and certainly the emergence of e-commerce in terms of the importance of expedited shipping through air cargo. The traffic is growing at approximately 3 to 5% a year worldwide. That basically means it's a doubling every 10 years. Air cargo is becoming a very big business, roughly $100 billion total, both air freight and air express worldwide. The express and integrated carriers, those are the FedEx, UPS, DHLs of the world, have grown to be about 43 billion of that total pie. We are also seeing that cargo is important to the airlines that fly only passenger aircraft as well, almost $12 billion. The integrated carriers I've mentioned have become such an important component to the worldwide air cargo industry. They control large portions of the US, European, Asian markets, and we're also seeing significant growth even in the African market. Cargo, as it pertains to the total airline revenues, is growing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a slide or two. But right now, it's about 15%, both to US domestic and European major airlines. And in Asia, it's even can be much more, 20 to even 50% of the Asian major carriers. On the next slide, I want to just touch briefly on an industry fact that we're starting to see is the use of freighter aircraft, the all-cargo aircraft in the industry. Both Boeing and Airbus are forecasting upwards of 2,300 new freighter aircraft within the next 20 years. One thing we are seeing inside of the freighter production is the industry is going towards more efficient aircraft, namely the 767 and the 777 freighters. These two-engine aircraft are providing good cargo capacity to the market, but in a much more efficient manner with 2 versus 4 engines that we see in, for example, in the 747-800. That is actually seeing the last of those in production this year in 2023. On the next slide, we look a little further into that idea of how the global air cargo revenue is making a bigger impact on the overall airline industry. We've seen this ramp up, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, going from roughly about 10 to 12%. The pandemic made that spike tremendously when we saw a dramatic drop in passenger aircraft traffic. We saw even the passenger airlines that only fly passenger aircraft had at least temporarily converted some of those over to freighter conversions. And while we are seeing that spike tip down, industry leaders like IATA and Boeing suggest that the contributions of air cargo revenue to overall airline revenue will be higher than we had seen historically. On the next slide, I want to spend a brief moment talking about some of the airports and the cargo tonnage that they handle. We looked at all the airports that you see on the lower graphic, but if I could focus your attention to the data in the table above, if we take Seattle, Boeing Field, and Spokane, the three of those airports account for 98% of the 21 statewide total cargo tonnage. So from those data, we looked at those three airports in depth, both for the market composition as well as the cargo forecast. And that's also been what's been handled that way by previous cargo studies, the JTC and some of the others. But when we look at the data in that chart above, we can see that Sea-Tac's grown roughly 4% CAGR as compound annual growth rate over that 5-year period. Boeing Field has seen a slight downturn. We'll spend a little bit more time in depth on that in a couple slides, but namely that's UPS is really the only cargo provider at that airport. We'll talk about how they serve that market. And Spokane also has seen a slight downturn. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple slides. While not going in depth in the market analysis or the forecast, Payne Field is included in our other group when we build the entire cargo forecast. It is worth noting there that they have seen a recent downturn, as you can see, quite dramatic actually, from 20 to 21, and that's largely because of the Boeing production slowdown at the site. But it's also worth noting that as the Dreamliner is coming to a conclusion there, FedEx has come into the market and said that they could take that facility and introduce daily flights to Payne Field, starting this last fall and winter, moving forward a daily flight from the national hub in Memphis. So you can see how already the cargo community is saying that they can effectively use other facilities in the area. Methodology for the forecast. There are a lot of words on this. I don't expect you to read them all. I'll hit on some of the high points. We reviewed previous analysis and studies. As I mentioned, the Joint Transportation Committee, the JTC, previous PSRC baseline study, and master plans as available, we looked at to help provide the base for our forecast effort. We use several forecasting techniques. Econometric modeling is important to establish the underlying economic factors such as GDP, industrial production, et cetera. We'll talk a little bit more about that next slide. Methodologies, we use top-down, bottom-up, as well as some independent regression and data analyses. A moment real quick on some of the industry drivers and some of the independent market outlooks. We look at both Boeing and Airbus. Boeing is suggesting that worldwide cargo tonnage would grow at 4.1% through 2041, and Airbus roughly 3.2% through 2040. Boeing does a very good job of not only worldwide forecasting, but regional activity. And we've included their North American domestic, which they suggest at 3.1%, and an important market to our air cargo market is the North American Asian market, and they suggest that should be growing at 4.4 through their 2041 forecast. On the lower half of this slide, I mentioned how important independent regression is to some of these forecasts, GDP is really a very important percentage change, a good representation of the region's propensity to use air cargo. We've got a historical graph and also forecast there. The historical, I'd really like to draw your attention to some of the downturns that we've seen in the past, whether it had been 9/11 or the slowdown, the financial crisis in 2008 and 9. We do see a downturn, but in terms of GDP and also directly correlated with the cargo market, we see a significant rebound quickly once things settle down. Projected GDP growth, North American is 1.6, worldwide 3.2, and then as I mentioned, the Asia Pacific market growing significantly faster, 4.4. The next couple slides are those three detailed analyses that we conducted at Sea-Tac, Boeing Field, and Spokane. The top graphic shows the different carrier groups. There are 4 of them. Integrated carriers, again, that's your UPS, FedEx, DHLs. The all cargo are the carriers like Atlas Air, Kalitta, some of those. Passenger airlines are those that fly just passenger aircraft, and the mixed carriers are those that fly both passenger aircraft and freighters. So if we look at the market in detail, the integrated carriers make up more than 50%, and that's namely FedEx at Sea-Tac. The passenger carriers, they make up about 19%. The mixed carriers about 20%, with Korea and Alaska, Delta, and China handling a large proportion of those of that market share. The all cargo market has grown significantly, and that's largely due to the expansion in e-commerce activity and the Amazon, for example, type of that activity. We do have total tonnage for 2022 at Sea-Tac, and we actually saw a relatively significant decline, 8.5%, largely due to slowing demand, inflation. Big part of that is the disruption in the global supply chains and depressed consumer spending. But I would like to kind of just reiterate the fact that when we've seen some of these downturns, like the GDP forecast, the air cargo market tends to be very resilient and rebounds quickly, especially when we'll see these supply chain problems sort of smooth themselves out. We'll see a commensurate rebound. And basically, we've got a forecast of 2.9% through 2042 planning horizon for Sea-Tac, reaching a little over 800,000 metric tons in 2042. So for Boeing Field, as I mentioned, it's basically one carrier. It's UPS operates basically the entire cargo market at Boeing Field. And one thing about these integrated carriers, they're very, I think that's why they get the word integrated. They integrate all of their modes into one service offering. If they can put the cargo on trucks, they do. So that's another part of what we see in this downturn. If they can meet the customer standards, shipping requirements via truck, they will, and it may be counted as air cargo tonnage. They've been putting it on trucks. So they are serving the greater Seattle market out of the Boeing Field with both express and deferred services, and the deferred services would be those second and third day service offerings that they can largely accommodate with trucks. Our forecast has the Boeing Field growing at 3.6. That roughly matches some of the previous studies, slightly higher in the next 10 years, slowing to 3.4 from 2033 to 2042. And in total, that would get slightly over 200,000 metric tons in 2042. At Spokane, again, this is sort of a common thing. The integrated carriers, as I mentioned on that very first slide, have become incredibly important to the cargo market. They are at Spokane as well. Both FedEx and UPS operate large operations there, up to the point where they handle roughly 91% of the market. We have seen some growth in the all cargo carriers. Again, that's to the e-commerce activity. The Amazons of the world gotten their activity towards 6%. And right now the passenger carriers are limited to 3% in terms of the total tonnage handled at Spokane. But that's due largely to the current regional aircraft that operate in the market. But as Spokane sees larger aircraft, passenger aircraft, they bring larger cargo capacity, and longer routes could see this market grow. So you see that reflected in our potential growth projections, 3.2% through our planning period. That would get Spokane to roughly 142,000 metric tons in 2042. So my last slide is our roll up. We have our three very detailed analysis and forecasts combined with the other group. And we've got that total tonnage growing at 3.1%, 3.1 through the 20-year forecast, 3.4 in the next 10, slowing slightly to 2.9 in the back half of the forecast period. We would see that resulting in slightly over 1.2 million metric tons in 2042. As a point of comparison, we're very close to several of the other forecasts that had been done previously. We do have a slight uptick because of we've seen the expansion in e-commerce logistics, and some of the fulfillment and distribution that comes with that activity.
Great, thanks, Ken. So that is our presentation. I said we'd have some time for questions, and I think Lauren, you had a question earlier. I guess I'll turn to you first, and then we can see if anybody else has any questions. Lauren, while you're trying to find your mute button, maybe I see Rudy. Is that Rudy? You have your hand raised. I'll go to you while we're waiting for Lauren to get online.
Yeah, thanks. Quick one. I'm a stick figures and crayons guy. So maybe if you could give me an example of what you referred to where the cargo carriers were using trucks instead of aircraft, or counting it as aircraft, but using as trucks. I didn't quite get that.
Sure. In fact, before my consulting life, I was an operational manager for UPS on the East Coast. And one of my daily responsibilities was to determine how many packages I could send up the East Coast. I was in Washington, D.C. at that time, to see how many trucks I could send to the New York, Philly, Boston, even Boston markets with trucks. Versus sending the packages to the airport. If the customer thought it was air cargo and we still met the shipping standards, but did it via truck, we met the customer's requests, but you're looking at sort of a business model and margin growth type of activity. So I guess one thing you could say is trucks are the lifeblood of the air cargo industry. So sometimes trucks interface with air cargo on every shipment. On these types of examples, it's not necessary that aircraft are used on every single shipment. If that helps, makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll go back to Lauren if you're able to speak now, if you want to add your question. Not hearing yet. I'll go. Looks like that Jim. Jim, do you have your hands raised? Jim Coons?
I do. Yep. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. I had a question related to the airspace analysis. So as I understand it, the 3 greenfield sites conflict, add, conflicts with airspace. So I get that. I just want to think outside the box. I know we can't recommend Joint Lewis McChord Air Force Base. I understand that. But the question I have is if for some miraculous analysis that there could be both civilian and military at Joint Lewis McChord someday in the future. Obviously, they do that in South Carolina and all of that. Does that airspace thing become a different discussion? Do those all continue to have red marks, or if there was joint service, let's say 50 years from now into that facility, because there's not a greenfield site nearby that makes it, very cumbersome. Does that help with airspace?
Mike, you want to take that or you want me to?
I can make a comment on that, depending upon the number of operations because currently Joint Base McChord has what's called Class D airspace with the FAA. And even if they had, joint civilian and military operations, depending upon the number of operations and the criteria and all, it would still be Class D airspace. They wouldn't have to make any changes to that. If it's a bigger facility that, they may become Class C airspace, which is a larger airspace that accommodates more traffic. And again, they're all designed based on a criteria and safety and operations and things like that.
Jim, do you think that answered your question or you want to follow up?
Well, it does. I mean, it helps with the discussion because the greenfield sites, as I see it, causes problems. Lots of problems with airspace. And by having more centralized airports that maybe someday could be joint use, it lessens the airspace issues, as I understand it. Again, we can't recommend it because the law doesn't allow it, but it doesn't mean I can't ask questions. And so it seems to me if we ever went to a joint, that it lessens the airspace issues. That's my conclusion. And if I'm wrong with that, please correct.
I might answer a little bit, Mike, and you can correct me as well. But as you said, Class D airspace, certain amount of operations work well with that Class D airspace. Once you get to a certain level of operations, it moves to a Class C airspace, which is what we are modeling. Now that Class C airspace begins to conflict with the Sea-Tac's Class B airspace. So there's a different sort of redesign and development that needs to be accomplished. So it's not an easy answer just saying just one site, no issues. It's probably one site, limited issues initially, but as operations increase, you insert different challenges with Seattle's Class B airspace.
Thank you for that clarification and thank you for the answer.
Yep. Great. On my screen, I'll go Tony and then Steve.
I appreciate it. This is Tony Bean. So for some of the edification purposes for people, one of the things we ran into with the realignment in Pullman, looking at, some of the challenges on the ground being farmland. I don't know what the mitigation is for farmland. We thought that was a good thing, not a bad thing. But transmission lines, we were able to work that out and we didn't have 6 miles, but I understand that's looking in the large circle of the impact area. But when you're talking about the mitigation pieces and the items on the ground that you were looking at with the 3 sites, and then you start looking at airspace, can you explain for people that, probably they're not in this side of it on how these 2 things work together and get into one of the things that we found that we were not prepared for was offset approaches where we needed land that we didn't know that we needed because of the way that aircraft had to approach the runway due to terrain and other things like that, that it may be more than just straight in lined up with a runway. Can you get into some of that?
You're talking about the approaches into each of those facilities and how that would work.
Yeah, what kind of land? Because we ended up having to purchase property or make mitigations that we didn't realize that we needed to have to make. Based on the initial, you see a runway and it's, oh, well, the flight's going to come straight into this runway and it's going to come here from X amount of miles, and it's not necessarily the case. And in this particular evolution, it probably will not be the case, but that there may be a lot more to one side or the other of approach end or a departure end of a runway.
Yeah, Michael asked you to help here with this, but I think the short answer is we looked at general routing in the airspace system to those sites. We didn't end up coming up with a precise routing into an actual runway configuration. So we probably don't have the information to show how this would fly over and approach into each of these sites. Even within those 5 acre areas, the location of the runway could, if a site is selected and an airport moves forward, that would have to be designed and determined. So our work, we were spending in the air, how to deconflict, how would you get to those locations, more so than the specific elements. But I don't know if Mike, you want to add anything about just when developing the approach to the runway, some things you're looking at?
Yeah, and David, that's correct, because we did not go down to the level of designing approaches, because that in itself is a very involved process. Again, with a lot of coordination, with procedure designers and the FAA within all their standards and all that. But we just basically looked at, in what I showed on the chart before, the Seattle TRACON, the bigger airspace is how do we get aircraft to the airspace, just to the Class C airspace. But internal to the Class C airspace, that would have to be a further detailed evaluation or study.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to study it, just the fact that it is out there, that it is not necessarily a straight in kind of a thing with the lineup with the runway, that there are potential on the ground, that it is not what's underneath the runway necessarily, that it could be to one side or the other is more of an impact than what's centered up with that runway.
Yeah, and with today's technology, with what they call RNAV approaches and flight management systems on aircraft, modern aircraft and all that, a variety of techniques can be done to design different types of approaches. But again, that would be, down the road with evaluations.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Appreciate the comment,
Thanks.
though, that the details definitely have to work out, and that we're not there yet, and it could change a little bit. Steve Edmondson.
Hey, first of all, thanks for all of that work. My head is spinning because so much of it is way beyond my pay grade, but I appreciate the workup. One of the things that I have been most concerned about and following during our entire process kind of falls under our third, as a commission, our third principle, our third guiding principle. And that is, I'm just going to read the sentence. It's environmental responsibility. And that is defined by us as a commission as a responsible interaction with the environment to avoid depletion or degradation of natural resources and allow for long-term environmental quality. And I'm sharing that because that's where my head's at. Like, that's my job as a commissioner, is to comply with our guiding principles when I select a site. And I saw in this secondary review, when we were talking about the environment, obviously we don't have, I think the phrase was, and I liked it, we don't have a clean, clear site. We don't have that easy call from the factors that you were looking at here. I guess my question is, can you help us out? I mean, I didn't hear a recommendation with respect to, as compared between these 3 sites, which one would be the one that allows us on that factor to be the most compliant with our guiding principle on the environment?
Yeah, I can say I did not provide a recommendation. We did not provide a recommendation. I think we try to provide a range of scoring, see what the different elements are, how each site looks. And it seems like you have several guiding principles you're trying to balance. And while one site, if you were looking for the site that is strongest specifically towards guiding the environmental guiding principles, you'd be looking for one that has the least amount of impact in those farmlands, aquifers, tribal impacts section of central public facilities section, looking for one in that area. But we don't, because I feel like there's a little bit of a balancing act between you want to meet the requirements for as a sustainable site, environmentally compliant site as you can, but you have other factors you're balancing at the same time. So we didn't provide a recommendation. Thought that was something that depending on where you're sitting on the commission, you have a choice to kind of decide which are the factors that are most important to helping decide on the location.
Okay, fair enough. Did you, I'm looking at the factors that are on this slide here, just sort of more, I guess and again, it's above my pay grade, but I think of traditional environmental impacts as just depletion of, more pristine natural resources and, wildlife, it's the flora and the fauna. Do we do any of that kind of work on these sites to make some assessment about which are the most favorable from the standpoint of mitigating environmental impacts?
Yeah, we have not gone through what you traditionally have as the NEPA process, right? This is all pre-NEPA. NEPA looks at 21 environmental characteristics. But we did look at a number of those different categories as far as how we were evaluating. In our initial screening, we had a few of those elements you're mentioning. So we looked at wetlands, we looked at floodplains. That initial screening had a lot of those type of elements that were being evaluated. And then after finishing that, we wanted to dig into some more. So you'll be wanting to be looking at the results of some of that initial screening that was done and presented in June. And then as well as this information that's presented now to kind of get the more complete picture.
And last question, and I really appreciate, I think these are hard questions. I spent a lot of time with this commission in 2021 talking about the public health study that was done. And we had a presentation by King County Public Health, Seattle, about the impacts of aviation over communities. From noise, from pollution, of course, climate change, but that study was more about the noise and pollution direct impacts on communities. Did any of your work on these three sites take that into account as a compare and contrast for the three sites?
So for that, I do remember that presentation in the study. And so we essentially made the assumption that that study is applicable to all three sites. So if one site would have essentially the same amount of activity as the other site, we didn't try and distinguish between one site having or another site having more or less activity. So we said from that that's ultrafine particulate consideration, each site was similar and not different. What we did do is in that early screening, we did look at a lot of the environmental factors from the EPA screening tool to understand different communities around each of those sites. And that initial screening tried to evaluate, I don't have it up right in front of me, but we looked at populations related income and BIPOC communities and things like that. And they were able to kind of screen between each of these different sites from that category and from that standpoint.
Thank you. You've given me a lot of time. I appreciate it.
Yep, you got it. Thanks, Steve. Any other questions from commission members?
Well, with that, David, if you don't mind, I think I'll jump in there. Just keep an eye on the clock and wanting to make sure that we conclude. We'll go ahead and end this presentation here, and I will ask Lindsay to go back to our previous slide deck and return back to slide 12, and we can pick this up from there. I am aware that some commission members cannot stay until 3 o'clock based on other commitments. As a result, and given that it's now 15 minutes past 2 p.m., I will make a chair decision and will dissolve the break that was on the agenda, just in the interest of saving time. If anybody does need to step away, we're in a virtual environment, certainly that's possible. For those of you that may still have your hands raised on the Zoom, if you would lower them as we go forward from there. And we'll just go ahead and conclude, now go into maybe the more free-form portion of the meeting, and probably the one that really will hopefully tee up our collective thought for future direction that we can make a recommendation to the legislature. So with that, we left off before the presentation at commission discussion of next steps. Lindsay, if you would go to the next slide. What I did is there are a couple of questions that I put together to kind of tee up the discussion. These slides were not in your agenda packet for today, nor on the website, but as I thought about teeing up the discussion to go ahead and create a roadmap, of which of course there are several, I wanted to have several open-ended items to go ahead and discuss, to kind of just at least lead and facilitate the discussion and gather input. So this first question we've already answered. Can we make a final recommendation today? That answer is no. We failed to achieve a quorum. We've addressed that for our next meeting. So we will call for another meeting. More than likely, it will need to be in April or in early May. That will be the intent of the WSDOT staff and the planning group to go ahead and put together some potential dates because we probably need to have this final meeting at least 30 days prior to the June 15th deadline. So we have enough time to synthesize a report, proof it and draft it and get it to the legislature. So next slide. So going back to why we're here. 3.5 years we've been at this, and our primary task before us now, no later than June 15th, is to identify a single preferred location for a new primary commercial aviation facility. And the second requirement, which was added in amended language to the initial CACC creation legislation, was to provide a projected timeline to ensure it is completed and functional by 2040. I would offer that we probably recognize with what we know today that that will be a Herculean achievement to have it functional by 2040. And I don't think that probably comes as a surprise to anyone. But going forward, here's a brief recap on what do we know today. What we know today is that we have gone through 2 phases. We've gone from 6 airports or a recommendation of 6 locations to 2, and now we must narrow it down to 1. I do want to point out that when we went from 6 to 2, that the only common thread between that change from phase 1 to phase 2 was Payne Field. Payne Field made both those first 2 lists. And then on the second list this past October, we chose 3 greenfield sites for further analysis and to look at what the obstacles and potential factors might be for consideration. That being said, there's nothing that says going forward to this final recommendation that we are bound by anything that has happened before. And I just want to create that. There's nothing in the law that requires that. We can go any direction that the CACC wishes to go. And so I think that's important to recognize in terms of how open-ended is this discussion and how bound are we by what we've done previously? Not at all, in my personal opinion. Others may have different opinion, but just my approach to looking at the language and where we've come. We recognize next that we have no government support for any of the greenfield sites in Thurston County and Pierce County, nor do we have sovereign Indian tribal support. The exception to governmental support overall, again, is the city of Yakima, which was not a greenfield site or any of the previous recommendations, but that is the one piece of government support that we do have, and that should be acknowledged. We recognize the amount of public awareness since October and the amount of widespread opposition to those 3 greenfield sites in Pierce and Thurston counties. We recognize too that Representative Jake Fye, when he went to Graham-Kapowson High School Town Hall, where there was probably between 500 and 700 attendees on January 13th, specifically was stated, assuming that the media quoted him correctly, and I have no doubt that they did, he stated that the state simply cannot afford to provide the infrastructure required by any of the 3 greenfield sites. So that is a data point. We recognize that the legislature is looking at discontinuing the work of the CACC and replacing it with a new body called the Commercial Aviation Work Group via House Bill 1791. We recognize on this last presentation the significant level of airspace and environmental constraints given the status quo of the areas. We recognize too that air cargo is growing at pretty much as expected from what we can see within variations of a theme, but certainly the market growth continues as was initially stated by Puget Sound Regional Council's data from the regional baseline study in 2021. So we see the growth is happening and moving forward from there. So then the next slide, please. what we have previously come up with is we recognized after that first year and looking at those first 6 sites of recommendations, that it was the commission's preference that we, the commission, did not feel it was possible to meet the capacity goals, both for commercial pastors and commercial air cargo, without a greenfield site. So the first question, and I'm going to lead these through very quickly, and then we'll come back to them, and then get some input from those that may have to leave early. So this first question, I just want to tee these up one at a time. Shall the single preferred site for a new commercial facility, should it be Painfield or a greenfield site? In other words, do we take that previous work in October and take it to the next step? Next slide, please. If a greenfield site is preferred, shall it be one of the 3 greenfield sites that we currently have on the map, or should it be a yet to be identified greenfield site? Recognizing that, again, it wasn't the CACC that created the greenfield sites, it was the Aviation System Plan update. Started with 10 greenfield sites in 6 counties. We narrowed it down to the 3 in 2 counties, but we have seen lots of opposition, many obstacles. Are these the right places, or is there maybe a yet to be identified greenfield site that has to be looked at? Food for thought. Next question and slide. What then, if whatever decision we make, what shall the projected timeline be to ensure a complete and functional facility? The legislature is looking to us to make some suggestion. Certainly, given that it's 2023 and we can rely on Tony Bean for how long it's taken him just to relocate a runway at an existing airport, how long this process might take. Next slide. The secondary task is that we also have to consider what recommendations on future facility needs need to be made for anticipated aviation, general aviation as well, and air cargo demands. That is a request that's within the founding legislature. Next slide. Then what additional recommendations does the commission wish to provide? We've already heard from Commission Member Jim Kuntz talk about, DOD, how that relationship might be taken a look at. We cannot, again, by the law, make a recommendation with JB Lamb, but here on the next slide, there is an opportunity to provide feedback to the legislature with this last question, number 6. And that is, we as commission have a right as voting member, or the voting members at least, have the right to wish to submit a minority report. That can just be an opinion or a viewpoint. And certainly outside the constraints of the legislation and the recommendations, if there is a desire by any voting member to submit a minority report to provide additional feedback to the legislature, that capability exists. And I want to make sure that everybody's aware of that, not only do we want to tie up the work that we've done as a body, but also recognize that assuming that this commercial aviation work group is put into place, we want to have some kind of a legacy so that we can pass this information along and some of the things that we've learned away to this next group. So let's go back to question number 2 and stop there for a second. And I will open this up at this point in time. If there is a commission member or 2 or 3 that may need to leave early and wants to share their perspective, and this is completely open-ended, and this is the time for people to just provide their thoughts, ask additional questions of the Kimley-Horn team or WASDOT Aviation staff or of each other. And let's see what the body of thought is, because I think maybe a consensus will begin to float to the top as to what commission members are thinking. So who can I call on first? Robin Toth, perhaps?
Sure. I'll go ahead. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
I love Painfield. It's great to fly in, great service, very easy to get to other places. But I don't know if that meets the need that was expressed by this legislation. I don't know if it's in the right location. We didn't really study that. And while I think it could be a contender for extended services, I don't know that it's going to meet the need of the population. And, it does not sound like we have support for anything in Thurston or Pierce counties. That's just my initial thought on this after having listened to a lot of people and read a lot of recommendations and documents that have been shared with us. I wouldn't land specifically on Payne Field as that new primary facility.
Any recommendations beyond that, Robin, or any other additional thoughts you'd like to share while you have the mic?
Nothing right at this time. I want to hear what others have to say, and then you can come back to me.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Shane, I think you might have had your hand up, please. Shane Jones.
I did. Thank you, Warren. I think you said it well that we have the flexibility to make multiple recommendations, which don't have to be Payne or a greenfield site, as you said. I think Robin's comments were very good that Payne we know can grow. Some of the studies that we did intentionally limited the growth projections to existing master plan. We could argue one way or the other if that's fair. But I do think it's fair to say that we don't know for sure if it could handle the long-term needs of the region in its location, and whether additional facilities may be needed. But I do think it's worth considering whether we recommend, because of the challenges on timeline to build a new greenfield site and the challenges with the sites that were discussed, that it's worth considering a Payne Field as at a minimum interim step, growing Payne Field while additional sites are continuing to be studied and perhaps recommended for further growth. The one other comment I would just make, I didn't get a chance to ask this question, but I appreciate the work the team did on looking at those 3 sites around airspace in particular. The one comment I would just make is, if Long Beach Airport, or let's get even more complex, if DCA or LaGuardia didn't exist today, and you did a airspace study on would there be significant impacts to other commercial, general aviation, and military airports in the surrounding region, the answer would astoundingly be yes, and probably times 10 compared to the sites we looked at today. I'm not saying that those 3 are the right sites or any one is better than the other, but airspace is a very complex issue. There are lots of examples of complex airspace being operated in a very safe manner across the country and across the world. So it is should be one of many considerations that are considered for additional airports.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Lauren Carr.
Yes, and it's interesting because Shane said something that was very close to a comment I was going to make. And I was actually going to use the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and the extremely complex Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, et cetera, airspace in that particular part of the world. And the fact that you can, the question I had originally intended to ask regarding that was, had anyone looked at that and compared the airspace impact for the 3 potential greenfield sites to locations such as the Bay Area or New York, Kennedy, Newark, those sort of locations? Because despite the significant impact, usually you can find a way to make this work, and there are many talented people that are and designers and engineers and whatnot that make that possible. So in terms of the airspace impact, I would suggest that may not be the most pressing concern, because I believe without further investigation, it probably is not necessarily a showstopper for any of the sites under consideration. Having said that, it's clear, I think any site that we choose to recommend is going to have opposition, and sincere opposition. The people that made public comments earlier, it was very clear that their concerns were well founded, based on their personal circumstances and their thoughts even on in some of the greater issues. And I don't think you're going to find any site where that is not the case. Now, having said that, I also think Payne Field is a good interim solution. It is an existing facility. It is in the general region that this needs to be, in the sense that it is primarily this has to be a reliever essentially for Sea-Tac is essentially the bottom line here. And it's for that reason that despite Yakima being willing, from at least a governmental perspective, to accept a greater role in the aviation sector for Washington State, its location is not ideal in terms of where practically. It's a situation of if you build it, they will not necessarily come. And I would point out the Mid-America Airport near St. Louis as an example of that, where an airport was built and it was not in the right location to attract the right levels of service. So to get us to bridge the gap through to 2040 or the whatever truly reasonable completion date for a new facility, Painfield does make a lot of sense, but I do not think is the primary, obviously not the primary location or the only recommendation that we should make. And that brings us back down to, do we choose amongst the 3 greenfield sites we have, and ultimately to meet the goal set by the legislation, that we should make a recommendation based on one of those 3 before this is dissolved or sunset, assuming that we're able to have a final meeting before any pending legislation would disband the commission and with a successor. So those are the comments that I had regarding this.
Thank you, Lauren. I did do a little research, with regard to the Bay Area in particular, for those that are familiar with the relative location and proximity to each other of Oakland, San Jose, and San Francisco, it's more of a triangular configuration than what we are or have been looking at here, where you've got Painfield to the north, Sea-Tac in the center, and a potential South Sound airport in the Thurston, Pierce County areas. The distance from San Jose to San Francisco International, as the crow flies, is 26 miles from airport center to airport center, and the 2 Pierce County sites are about 28 miles. So the end result is distance wise is, yes, there's probably some terrain, but there's terrain in California too. The end result is they did find a path to make that work there. So I think these comments with regard to, yes, it would be complex and not easy to be done, but we do see examples elsewhere. So, but I think that's a good point to take a look at these other areas too. Rudy Rudolph.
Yeah, thanks. Well, to use the aviation metaphor here, I think we're focused on staying on glide slope and centerline, and I want to offer an alternative perspective. Maybe we should be going missed approach here. We all joined, and this organization agreed to be part of it for our reasons, and everyone's put in a tremendous amount of work. This group was formed by the legislature. The legislature has now come along and created, while it's not finalized yet, it's pretty much on track to be finalized. It's going to render this group moot. And I think, capitalizing, Warren, on what you said at the tail end of your remarks before we went back to question 2 here, I think perhaps one of the best things we can do is to ensure that all of our data and information is appropriately keyed up and packaged to hand off to the next group that's going to come along. And instead of focusing on a recommendation, it might be more appropriate to acknowledge that circumstances have developed that the legislature could not have anticipated in the original legislation. Consequently, we're not going to make a recommendation, but we're going to share with you all of the information and those circumstances that have come to forward, since we started this process. And I don't feel tremendously strongly about it. I'm not a voting member, but I thought I at least might offer that perspective.
Well, thanks, Ray. I appreciate that. And, I'd like the other commission members to kind of, provide some feedback on that. Because one of the thoughts is that here we have a clear charter that's laid out to us by the legislation that we will make this recommendation, but the possibility exists to some extent that, well, maybe we shouldn't. And I'm just curious what the commission members would think about going down that path. Does that path either provide a compliance question that we haven't done the assigned task, or is it an alternative that should appropriately be considered? Just trying to get a feel for the pulse of what all commission members might be thinking along those regards. Steve?
Yeah, I'm glad I'm just able to jump in behind Rudy. I generally like that approach, or missed approach, if that's what we might call that. And I guess one thing that might help me sort of get to that point, even today, like that's a good plan for us. I've been asking questions, as you've noticed during the day. Is someone going to give us a recommendation as among these 3 sites and a rationale for why we're picking that site? And I guess, to be honest, as a commissioner, I expected that somebody, whether it was WSDOT staff or one of our consultants or somebody, would be saying, we've done all of this work and we've looked at these sites and we've winnowed them down. And for the following reasons, we think the best recommendation is X, Y, and Z. And then I would think as a commission, we'd be able to ask questions about that recommendation. And where I feel that we are right now is a ginormous data dump. I don't know certainly that I am equipped to synthesize that data, and would be looking for some support in synthesizing that data. And Rudy's suggestion, to a certain practical extent, eliminates that dilemma. And maybe, Warren, you can let me know if we have another meeting, are we going to get a recommendation from somebody having synthesized all this, or are we really going to be voting based on our own abilities?
That's a good one. Let me come back to that, Steve, but Tony Bean has his hand up here. Let's hear what Tony has to say. Then I'll come back and provide some feedback to your comment.
Hey, Warren. And I'm like Rudy. I'm not a voting member. I do have some experience with this. I don't think anything's not doable. There's nothing in here based on all of the hurdles that we had to go through with Pullman in order to move a runway and actually go through the process that it's going to take. But it really is up to, I think, the voting members in the charter. I would be reluctant to do the go around, not necessarily looking at what a future commission could do. I really think we should focus on what the charter for this commission actually was. And if the answer to that from the voting members is that we really don't have an answer, then that's a deliverable that needs to be given back to the legislature, in my opinion. And that's a perfectly sound deliverable if that really is the feeling that we have a whole bunch of data. Let's say it's a large data dump, as Steve described, because it is. We have a lot of data out there, and it's not necessarily completely all put together. There's a lot of data because it was a large scope. And if the answer to the voting members in their minds is that it's a lot of data, we don't have sufficient information to actually give a formal recommendation on an exact choice. And I think that's up to them, but I think it needs to be finished. I think it needs to get played out to the point where votes are taken. And if that vote is to use the proverbial go around or to pick a site, I think that's the purview of the voting members, and they deserve to have that capability irregardless. But the legislature absolutely deserves to have an answer regardless of what that is from this commission, irrespective of a future commission.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Well, let me address both of your comments. And again, I also am a non-voting member. There was a question made during the public comment if my transition to permanent chair changed that. It does not. I remain a non-voting member because of the nature of my appointment to the commission from the Washington State Aviation Alliance. That's a non-voting slot. So just being chair does not change that. So the voting members remain unchanged from that perspective. But going forward, a couple of thoughts. And as a result of the amount of public engagement, I just found myself having had the opportunity to enjoy these last 4 or 5 months is I will admit to having my own opinions. Of course, now it places me in a difficult situation. As the chair, I'm supposed to facilitate the discussion as opposed to just pontificate. But ultimately, I do wind up with some opinions that, just like any other commission member, I would just put on the table. I have a sense on a couple of ways. In terms of timeline and need, I agree that there is a place for Payne Field to play. that they are an interim first step. I don't necessarily think that they are the actually meets the criteria for new primary commercial aviation facility, simply because it won't meet all the capacity needs. But in terms of timeline, what can be done as a lockstep position would be Painfield certainly has a place to play. And I think Painfield will probably achieve that even without the commission necessarily making such a recommendation. Painfield will do what it's going to do to serve its Snohomish County residents in the surrounding area. And their master plan is moving in that direction. So that's a positive step. But what I also have to recognize too is that I believe that the commission's decision back in our first year was that the realization that we cannot meet the capacity needs in 2050 and beyond without a greenfield site. I believe that that decision is still an accurate one and a valid one. And if we're serious about, attacking the capacity needs and demands for both commercial passengers and air cargo, then that will need to happen. What I don't think we've done is identify the right site yet. I believe that there's probably an unidentified greenfield site that's there that we just haven't looked at, studied, and analyzed. And as much as we've looked at areas, there may be a place to play, and we need to expand the team as this new work group will do. But in terms of a recommendation, Steve, when you're looking for it, I mean, I can only offer my 2 cents as to where I think we need to go. I don't think the existing 3 greenfield sites, given the aquifers, the Nisqually River shed, the environmental constraints, the lack of governmental support as an airport sponsor, and the public pushback, these may not be the right ones. It's not to say that it puts a permanent nail in that one down the road, but at least for the time being, I think a message to the legislature that would say, this commission still thinks an identified some greenfield site airport is necessary to meet the capacity. That's the message. If the commission only says, well, we think that the commercial facility is Painfield, the question I ask myself, and I think maybe others have as well, is have we then just punted and maybe not, answered the question that was demanded of us when this commission was created? So those are some, of my 2 cents thoughts, which again, don't amount to any more than any other commission member, but just some of the perspective that I've seen here over the last few months in particular. So let me throw it back out to the crowd. Steve.
Oh, I just want, if I didn't put my hand down, I'm going to do it now, but I was actually going to jump in and just say, as you were talking, Warren, I was just thinking how grateful I am that you stepped in as an interim and how appreciative of all the time that you have spent in this process and are now still going to spend. And I can't thank you enough. And I'm sure everyone on this commission feels the same way. And thanks for addressing the points I just made. I appreciate that as well. That's all I want to say.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma, and no clear solution exists. Certainly, we need to contemplate this with regard to what ultimately we do at this next meeting. What is the consensus? What I've heard from, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individuals that have commented is that there is a role for Painfield to play, but we recognize that whether it be location or capacity limits, given its requirements to also serve the needs of a primary aircraft manufacturer, how will that ultimately play in meeting capacity, and what's the next step going forward? Certainly, it's not going to be a given answer that everybody can agree with come June 15th or before. I think the challenging thing that is, if there's one surprise from my perspective, is the absolute lack of political will to really tackle, a method by which we provide the infrastructure that our communities need. We provide pipes, we provide medical facilities, we provide public schools. This is just another piece of infrastructure, but certainly it has raised eyebrows at all political government levels, and it's going to be a tough one, I think, to tackle going forward for the new work group and for the state legislature. And I think that's just an accurate, my personal accurate assessment on what it may take. And ultimately, we may have to just wait for the capacity to become a limiting daily factor in everyone's lives before action may be taken, but that's yet to be seen down the road. Any additional comments at this point? Lindsay, let's go to the next slide. And again, I just want to tee up a couple of thoughts going forward. Ultimately, Steve, I think you're correct. If I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, as an entire commission, I don't think necessarily staff or any one individual should come with, this is the recommendation, and then we vote it up or vote it down. Ultimately, as difficult as a process it may be, I think the commission is better served by, and admittedly, to use the term, we are making sausage in a very public forum, but it deserves the light of day. And to recognize that we are dealing with our four guiding principles, how mindful we are of those, the impacts that any decision and recommendation made is going to potentially have on our wider communities. We can't shirk away from that. So this is one question before us. You know, certainly we could make a case. Unfortunately, Robert Rodriguez from JBLM could not join us today, but certainly he has articulated to me through the garrison commanders that all three of these greenfield sites do in fact pose a negative impact on JBLM. So that again is a restriction placed on the CACC. So that in itself may be an impossible barrier to mitigate. Next slide. And we talked about the timeline here a little bit. Next slide again. And then these other recommendations. And this is where, you know, does Yakima deserve a place? Does it deserve at least acknowledgement in our report to the legislature that it has a place? My personal opinion is, yes, it does deserve a recommendation. The challenge, of course, I think, is we recognize that the people live in the Puget Sound Basin. Yakima is the other side of the pass. And ultimately, it comes down to how do we move 55,000 people a day to Yakima? And could that be done? And if so, is that a possibility? Okay, Lauren Carr, over to you.
Yes, so I just had a quick question. I wanted to, or if we could get more information for the next meeting, what the impact was on McCord, because I was curious when it says it has a negative impact on them, what does that mean exactly? Because certainly we'll understand the commission is not supposed to make a recommendation that has a negative impact on them. I also want to make sure I understand when we say it has a negative impact. I mean, does that mean it'll be hard to hear somebody at the gates when they open because of overhead traffic? I mean, I'm just making stuff up, right? Essentially, what does that mean? The second thing, and I just want to reiterate regarding discussing Yakima, is that one, well, I admire the fact that the Yakima has stepped up and said, hey, we would be really, really interested. And I appreciate the acknowledgement that getting 50,000 people, or however many people, from the Puget Sound region to add Yakima is going to definitely be a challenge. I just want to reiterate that from a logistical standpoint, the eastern side of Washington, and this is where my commercial background comes into play, is probably not going to work, I think, in the manner in which people hope. And that choosing something that distant with the natural barriers and impediments to ingress and egress from the region that really needs the service will create a situation where significant resources could be invested in a facility that does not get the use for which it is designed or intended. So I just want that back in there, that while we certainly can mention Yakima and I applaud their willingness to be a part of the solution. I just want my skepticism as to that being a plausible solution to the Puget Sound area that I have doubts as to whether that's a possibility.
Excellent point. Thank you, Lauren. Tony Bean.
Thanks, Warren. Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Lauren, is I think if the commission decided to entertain the solution that Yakima's presented, and an appreciation of them for sending it to the commission, I believe early on, we had that same kind of a situation with Moses Lake and other sites that would have been, or would be considered closer, central Washington-ish, maybe, that kind of an idea. I think we'd have to look at that too, and it almost dilutes the whole process of solving the solution, or presenting a solution to the Puget Sound centric issue that we're really tackling. And I don't know that we want to get that large in scope, and that's concerning to me. It almost gets to be mission creep, if you will, to try to figure that out. I think it becomes unwieldy for the commission to try to take on, other than I agree that should be mentioned that they definitely reached out and wanted to participate in the process. And we may have future other entities do the same thing that did see that same communication and maybe having their own discussions internally.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Let me take a few moments here to put an open-ended question to the group. What information specifically will you need before our next meeting? Lauren's already identified getting some direct impact feedback from JVLM. We can certainly arrange for that. Maybe they could provide us some specifics, with regard to, direct impacts on their mission capability and what mitigations might exist or might not be possible. So that's one. What other information specifically, recognizing that we've got literally maybe 4 to 5 weeks of opportunity to get it, could be provided?
Steve here, I'll just pitch in. There's a lot of information I wish we could have, but I'm learning that we're just not going to have access to that, whether it's, the professional staff work that's going to sort of synthesize this information and say, well, here's from this perspective, from the perspective of our environmental guidelines, this is the best site, that kind of stuff. We're not going to see it. I just don't think that's realistic at this point. That's the kind of information I would like. You and I talked about that, several weeks ago, that we're to make a decision as someone who has been put on the commission for the purpose of thinking from the standpoint of a citizen at some of these selected sites, and listening to those citizens, and they're quite eloquent. Even today, I was very impressed with the public comment, throughout the entire public comment, and that collective public comment over now many months and years, as an aggregate, is stunningly, I think, sophisticated and wise. And if we're going to try to learn from them, I feel like we have to figure out how to use that information. And if the only way to use it is to say nobody wants it, and I think that's where we're leaning, is that nobody in these greenfield sites that are fairly populated, they're not truly rural, with nobody there. That's a huge learning for us. And, as far as, what, I don't know, the information I want does not appear to be available. I guess that's the statement, Warren.
Yeah, recognizing that there's limitations. I mean, we've been created with this body of work, but admittedly recognize, just the facts of the matter are, we haven't been funded with or provided a staff or a funding mechanism by which these open-ended questions could be reached and achieved. Just the nature of the work for an all-volunteer force, and with WSDOT Aviation's incredible assistance and good funding for public outreach via PRR, but ultimately we have been resource limited, and I don't think I'm saying anything that is not a recognized factor. I appreciate that, Steve. Thank you.
And I just to follow up, I just think that's a great thing for us to, if we go forward with sort of this recommendation, and I love the comment earlier about packaging up all of the work and make sure it's available. You know, I think that to me is a huge learning for us to say, no, we can't repeat this process if we don't have funding to do some of the work that we might traditionally consider as NEPA work after selection. You know, if the communities are going to be this active, which is appropriate, how do we address that? And it seems like the way to address it is to have a budget to really drill deeper into some of these concerns that they are expressing about public health and the environment, and really be in a position where transparently we can say, we've looked at everything and we can tell you this is the best site for all of those reasons. And I think that even if it feels out of order for those of us that have been in the airline aviation ecosystem to kind of do a quasi NEPA before we select a site, I think in terms of site selection, we're learning we have to do some of that work. We just have to do some of that work. So, I mean, I just throw that into the ether.
Absolutely. Steve, I think that's an excellent segue. Lindsay, if you could fast forward to the last slide on the wrap up, I think that that's a great opportunity then to go forward with, you know, just my final comments here in recognition of the time and appreciative of the efforts. So I want to recap what we have accomplished today is we've now established a permanent chair for the organization, and we've now established a quorum, which meets the intent of the legislation and therefore should not tie our hands artificially. So these are positive achievements that came out today, as well as the additional work of the presentations from both PRR and our Kimley Horn consultant team on the aviation system plan update. In general, I would leave these thoughts with all the commission members as we prepare for these next few weeks going ahead. And I speak personally and from the heart. First and foremost, I am very proud of the work that we have accomplished as a body. We have been together for 3.5 years, provided in a Herculean task from the legislature. We didn't know what we didn't know when we started this. And what we have achieved is at least created a tremendous body of knowledge, even if we haven't achieved that perfect solution that pleases everyone. But certainly we've added to the body of knowledge. We've studied a great deal of information. We've been mindful of our 4 guiding principles, and we have greatly heightened public awareness. This is a set of circumstances that require all of us at every level of government and community to be involved in a positive outcome. We're not there yet. There's much more work that needs to be done, but in terms of where we started and where we are today, we have a mindful public, we have mindful governments, we have mindful communities. That's all to the benefit of all of us and to this commission's work and the legislature's oversight. I am pleased particularly at how we have conducted our business. The people at the table have tremendous expertise in each of their respective areas. We have been critical thinkers. All of us have listened intently to each other's point of view, respectfully. That doesn't happen in every body, as we have probably all seen in our own personal, professional, and personal histories. This is an incredible testimony to the nature of the work and how we've conducted our business. Certainly, there's always room for improvement, but I'm very proud of what we've done and how we've gotten here, at least to this point. I encourage the public to remain engaged, both with the CAC and should there be a future commercial aviation work group, stay engaged with the process, stay informed, use the source data, recognizing we had social media groups that were in the thousands, but we have 920 on the listserv that provides all the initial data. It's a challenge in this day and age to communicate effectively with facts and data. I encourage all of us to work hard to continue to do a better job at that and make sure there's greater awareness at all levels. And lastly, I would leave you with this. I look at whatever decision we make at this next meeting, that certainly won't be the end of the discussions. And there are 4 thoughts that I have going forward to really kind of just level set and kind of go back to square one. The first question is, do we agree we have a problem? Is aviation capacity demand a problem? If it's not, we're done there. But before we go any further, the public, the community, the governments, the Indian sovereign nations all have to agree that this is a problem. And then question number 2 is it worth solving? You know, or are we just willing to live with it? And so we have to agree there's a problem. We have to agree that it's worth solving. And then if we agree to that part, and if so, all of that is true, then how do we do that? Not just where. Ultimately, the CAC has been given the job of pointing out where, but we haven't answered all these other questions, environmental, social, future, airports of the future, emerging technologies, sustainable fuels. We haven't answered the how, we haven't answered the who, we haven't answered the what. And there's a lot of questions that need to go into this, and we need to figure out how we're going to do it. And lastly, the last question, number 4, is if we say there's no problem, it's not worth solving, then do we acknowledge then that we are willing to accept the consequences of taking no action and all that means? Economic impact, jobs, travel restrictions, airfare pricing, limited shipping capabilities. Are we willing to accept those consequences? And somewhere in there lies the answer as to the future direction going forward. So my final thoughts, the website is shown here. The email address is available. I thank all of those from the public that have attended today. Your interest is greatly appreciated. The comments were wonderful and well delivered, and we didn't miss a beat as far as the commission members. And with that, I thank everyone for their time. I thank the commissioners for not only your personal vote of confidence in me, but in the work that we do collaboratively to solve an issue that the legislature has provided us to create an answer for. So thank you very much, and I call this meeting adjourned. Have a good day.